Cole Bannister put his hand on the arm of a woman with 3 broken ribs and shoved her backward off his flight line, like she was garbage the wind had blown in. "Step away from the aircraft. You don't belong here." He saw bruises, borrowed clothes, no badge, no rank, no shirt, but a sports bra soaked through with sweat. He decided she was a threat, and he decided it in under 4 seconds. What he didn't know was that 62 miles offshore, 5 Americans were bleeding out on a cliff face waiting for the one pilot he was about to arrest. Before we go on, if this story moves you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end because it only gets more powerful from here. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now let me take you back to the beginning. She had been standing on that concrete for 11 minutes before anyone spoke to her, and in all 11 minutes, not one of the 200 people working that flight line had looked at Riley Vaughn twice. That was the part that would come out later in the investigation and the sworn statements, in the long quiet afternoons when men who had been out there that morning tried to explain to somebody why they hadn't done anything. 200 people. Fuelers, maintainers, a corpsman on a smoke break, a lieutenant walking a clipboard from one hangar to the next. Every one of them had passed within 30 feet of a 25-year-old woman with a butterfly bandage over her eyebrow and a bruise going yellow-green down her ribs, standing at a restricted aircraft with her palm pressed flat against its skin, and every single one of them had made the same calculation in the same half-second and moved on. She didn't have a badge. She didn't have a flight suit. She wasn't anybody. So they let her be nobody, and they kept walking. And that decision, 200 small, identical decisions made by 200 decent people, was going to cost the United States Navy about 90 minutes it did not have. Riley Vaughn knew exactly what she looked like. That was the thing nobody understood until much later. She wasn't oblivious. She had done the math on herself before she ever walked out of that building. She knew that a woman in an olive-drab sports bra and camouflage trousers with her hair falling out of a ponytail and dry blood still in the creases of her left ear was going to read to any reasonable observer as a problem, and she had made the choice anyway, and she had made it in about 4 seconds flat, lying in a bed with a needle in her arm. Because the alternative was 5 men on a rock in the ocean. Her hands stayed on the fuselage. The metal was hot enough that a normal person would have pulled away inside 2 seconds, and she had been holding it there for most of 11 minutes, and the small circle of skin under her palm had gone past pain into a kind of numb buzzing that she was ignoring the way she ignored most things. She was listening to the aircraft. That sounded insane. She was aware of how it sounded. There was no version of that sentence she could have said out loud to a stranger without ending up in a psychiatric evaluation, and she had never once tried. But she had flown this airframe tail number 260 for 2 years and 51 missions, and there are things you learn about a machine with your hands that no diagnostic panel will ever tell you. The way heat moved through a panel that had been reskinned, the faint difference in how a seam sat after a hard cycle. She had put her palm on this helicopter 40 hours after it had nearly killed her, and she was asking it a question, and the question was, can you go up again? And she needed the answer before anyone else took it away from her, and pressed hard against her right leg, taking maybe 15% of her body weight without ever once being told to was tighten. Who was an adult German Shepherd, 4.5 years old, tan, gold, and black, and his tactical harness had Titan stitched into the left panel and Ghost stitched into the right. He had not eaten in 40 hours. He had a torn pad on his left rear foot that had been glued shut by a veterinary tech who had cried while she did it. He had not moved more than 18 inches from Riley Vaughn since the water, and he had not slept, and he had not made a single sound. He didn't bark. He had never been a barker. When Titan had something to say, he said it with his ears and his shoulders, and a sound in his chest so low that most people felt it in their sternum before their ears caught up. Right now, his ears were forward, and his weight had shifted to his front legs. Riley felt it through her thigh before she saw anything, and that was how it always worked. Titan knew first. Titan had always known first. In 2 years of working together, she had learned to trust that dog's shoulders more than she trusted her own eyes. And what his shoulders were telling her right now was that somebody was crossing the tarmac toward them, and that they were coming fast, and that they were not coming to help. "Ma'am," she didn't turn around. "Ma'am, step away from the aircraft." Cole Bannister was 24 years old, and he had been at Iron Harbor for 7 months, and he was terrified. Not of her. He wouldn't have understood the sentence if you'd said it to him that morning. What Cole Bannister was terrified of had been terrified of every single day since he'd raised his right hand at 18 was that he was going to be the man nothing ever happened to, that he would do 20 years of standing at gates and checking decals and writing up expired stickers and retire and have absolutely nothing to say about any of it. His father had been a machinist. His grandfather had been a machinist. Cole had joined because he wanted one time in his life to stand between something bad and somebody who needed him to. 7 months, nothing had ever happened, and then on the hottest morning of the year, something did. So when he saw her no badge, no cover, half-dressed, bruised, unauthorized hand on a restricted airframe, what he felt was not suspicion. It was closer to relief. Every piece of training he had ever received fit this moment like a key sliding into a lock, and he was the one standing in front of it. And for the first time in 7 months, Petty Officer Cole Bannister was going to matter. That was the whole thing. That was the entire mechanism of the worst mistake of his life. It was not cruelty and it was not prejudice. It was a young man's hunger to finally be useful, and it made him move faster and listen less than he ever had before. "I heard you the first time," Riley said, "then step back." "I can't." "You can't." He said it flat, repeating a word he had already filed as a lie. "I need to see identification." "I don't have any." "Then you've got a serious problem." She almost laughed. Laughing had been on the list of impossible things for about 40 hours now, so what came out instead was a slow breath through her nose that hurt going out more than it had going in. "My gear was cut off of me," she said. "2 days ago, sick bay. My card was clipped to the chest of it. If you want it, it's in a red biohazard bag in that building, and I would genuinely, sincerely appreciate it if you went and got it, because I've been trying to get somebody to do that since yesterday afternoon and nobody has 30 seconds. That's not how this works." "I know exactly how this works. I've been in this Navy for 5 years, and I have never once had a day where a piece of plastic was the difference between me and a cell, and today I do, and I understand that. I'm not arguing with the rule. I'm telling you where the card is. You have no idea how this looks." "I promise you," Riley said quietly, "I have a much better idea how this looks than you do." He looked at her. And here was the trap. He walked straight into the trap that catches good people every single day. Every observation he made was correct, and the conclusion he built out of them was completely wrong. Bruise correct, no badge correct, wrong clothes for the flight line correct, standing crooked with one arm tucked against her side correct, refusing lawful direction correct. He had a checklist in his head, and she was checking every box on it. What Cole Bannister did not have a checklist for was the dog. Titan hadn't growled. He hadn't lunged. He was simply standing between them now, and Bannister realized with a small, cold jolt that he had no memory of the animal moving there. It had happened while he was talking. 70 pounds of absolute stillness had relocated itself into the space between a threat and a woman silently in the middle of a sentence, and Bannister's own eyes had not caught it. "Is that animal under control?" "Hi is." "Ma'am, is that animal?" "He's under control," Riley said, "for exactly as long as you are." And that was the first mini fracture in Cole Bannister's certainty. Not enough to stop him, just enough that some small honest thing at the back of his skull said that is not how a crazy person answers that question. He reached toward his radio, and that right there, that one motion was the moment he could have turned the entire day around. He could have keyed it and said a name and asked a question and been a footnote in nobody's life. Instead, his hand kept going past the radio, and he took another step forward because his pride had already decided he was right, and a man who is already right doesn't need to ask anybody anything. "What's your name?" "Vaughn." "Vaughn what?" "Lieutenant Riley Vaughn." He handed the word lieutenant back to her the way you hand back a bill you're fairly sure is counterfeit, and she didn't argue. That was the thing about Riley Vaughn that nobody at Iron Harbor had figured out yet. Not her squadron, not her commander, not the men who'd flown beside her. In 5 years, no living person had ever heard her explain herself to somebody who had already made up their mind. She'd learned that lesson at 21 in a room that had nearly ended her career, and she had learned it hard. Explanation is a gift, and you do not hand gifts to people who are busy deciding what you are. You wait, you let the truth arrive on its own schedule, and if it costs you, you pay. Only today it wasn't going to cost her. Today it was going to cut to 5 men she had never met. So she stood there and let a 24-year-old not believe her And inside her chest, a clock she could not stop kept running. Because 2 hours earlier, she had been flat on her back with an IV line in her arm and a nurse telling her in the specific patient voice they use on people. They have decided or difficult that she needed to stay down. And somebody out in the corridor had a handheld turned up too loud. 4 words came through the wall and pulled her upright so fast the monitor alarmed. Troops in contact. Saltgrave. She knew Saltgrave. Everybody who flew out of Iron Harbor knew Saltgrave, a black spine of rock 62 miles offshore cliffs. On 3 sides, a shelf of loose scree on the fourth that had killed 2 crews in 15 years and injured a dozen more. She had trained on it. She had put a hoist on it at night and weather in a crosswind, which was a thing that exactly 3 people in the entire wing were currently certified to do, and 2 of them were on the mainland at a conference. And she knew something else, something the men on that radio might not have assembled yet. Tail 216, her aircraft, the one under her hand right now. It was the only airframe on this station configured, loaded and fueled for that exact profile because she had watched Senior Chief Rourke's crew build it out for that contingency 6 days ago. Before the water, before everything. And there was a tropical system 18 hours out and closing, which meant the weather window wasn't a window at all. It was a door swinging shut and you could hear the hinge. So she had pulled this line out of her own arm. She had gone through a supply closet and found trousers that fit in a shirt that didn't. And she hadn't bothered with the shirt because getting an arm above her head was a 90-second project with a screaming break in the middle of Ed, and she did not have 90 seconds to spend on modesty. She had walked out of that building, past a corpsman who shouted at her twice, and then gave up on legs that were doing about 60% of their job with a dog on a torn foot walking beside her without being asked. 400 yards of open concrete in 106 degrees. She'd had to stop twice. And now she was going to lose all of it, the aircraft, the window, the 5 men to a young man with a clipboard for a brain, and there was not one single thing she could say that he would accept. There are people dying, she said, who are going to need this aircraft. Bannister paused. Something in the way she said it landed differently than everything else she'd said. It was too flat, too tired. She'd said it the way a person says a thing that is simply true and costs them nothing, and for about half a second a door opened in his head. Then it slammed because that was exactly what a desperate person said. That was the script. Everybody who wasn't supposed to be somewhere had a reason bigger than the rules. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think is happening here," he said, "but standing next to a helicopter you can't prove is yours isn't saving anybody. It's a security violation. Now step behind the line. I'm not going to fight you." "Good. I want to be clear about that because I don't want you thinking I'm being brave." Her voice had gone very even. "I'm not brave right now. I'm at the end of something. If you put a hand on me, I go down. And then you've got an unconscious woman on the deck and a working dog with an opinion about it. And I promise you, neither of us wants to live in that minute." She looked at him. "But I am not walking away from this aircraft." And that was when the laughter started. There were 4 of them, and they came out of the hangar line the way men do when they're between things, loose, unhurried, half listening to each other, 3 lieutenants and the man walking in front of them. Lieutenant Commander Preston Vale was 38 years old, and he had a jaw like a recruiting poster and a service record that looked immaculate to anybody who didn't know how to read the gaps in one. He had gone to selection twice. He had failed twice. The first time he'd told everyone it was a knee, and it had even been partly true. The second time he'd stopped telling anyone anything at all, and instead he had spent 11 years building an entire personality out of being the most competent man in every room that did not require him to prove it. He did not hate women. He would have been genuinely, sincerely offended by the accusation, and this is the uncomfortable part, he'd have been telling the truth. What Preston Vale hated was ease. He hated watching something arrive at 25 for somebody else that he had bled 15 years for and still never gotten his hands on. And when he saw a young woman standing on his flight line, half-dressed and bruised with her hair coming apart, what his nervous system produced was not desire, and it was not contempt. It was the oldest and pettiest emotion there is. Why does she get to stand there? He slowed down as he came up. That was the tell. Men who are about to be cruel always slow down first. "Everything all right here, petty officer?" "Sir, unauthorized individual, no ID, refusing to comply." Vale looked at her. He took his time about it, and he took it in front of an audience, which was the entire mechanism. Sweetheart, he said, if you're looking for the gem, it's on the other side of the road. Well, none of the lieutenants laughed. Then the second one did, because laughing was easier than not laughing when a commander was standing right there and you were 26 and hadn't made your name yet. And the third pulled out his phone, and it wasn't even malice. It was so much worse than malice. It was the pure reflex of a generation that films things, and he got 7 seconds of a bruised 25-year-old woman standing at an aircraft while a senior officer made a joke about her body. 7 seconds. That clip was going to matter enormously later. Nobody in that group had the faintest idea. Riley did not answer. She had been screamed at by a door gunner in 3 languages. She had been hoisted through rotor wash bad enough to crack a windscreen. She stood on that concrete in front of 4 men who were laughing at her, and she did not move, and her face did not change, and the only thing on that entire flight line that reacted was the dog. Titan came up off his haunches slow. Not a lunge, a rise. Head level with his shoulders, eyes locked, and the sound came out of him then. That low thing so deep it registered as pressure before it registered as noise. Vale stepped back. He did it before he could stop himself, a full half step on the balls of his feet, and then he heard the sound of his own boots scuffing backward on concrete, and he understood in the same instant that all 3 of his lieutenants had heard it too. So he laughed louder. That's what men do when they get caught flinching. They get loud. Somebody call animal control, Vale said. Christ almighty. His name is Titan. It was the first thing she'd said since they'd walked up, and she said it so quietly that all 4 of them had to stop talking to hear it, which was precisely why she said it that way. He's a certified detection dog. He has 140 combat hours. 40 hours ago, he was underwater inside a sinking airframe for about 90 seconds, and when he came up, he had a man's collar in his teeth, and that man is alive in the ward behind you right now with a wife who flew in last night. Her voice didn't rise once. He hasn't eaten since. He's standing on a torn pad that's glued shut. And 30 seconds ago, he put his body between you and me, sir, which is more than any of the 3 men behind you manage. A beat. But go ahead and call animal control. Nobody laughed. One of the lieutenants, the one with the phone, lowered it slowly and looked at his own hand like he wasn't sure how it had gotten up there. Vale's face went through 3 separate things very fast, and the last one was the dangerous one. He had crossed that tarmac to collect an easy moment of superiority in front of his juniors, and instead he had flinched at a dog and been spoken to like a boy by a half-dressed woman on hot concrete, and there were 3 witnesses and a phone and a story that would be in the wardroom by dinner. Petty officer, he said, and his voice had gone smooth and reasonable in a way that was far worse than shouting. Get her off my flight line. Yes, sir. And if she won't move you, move her. That's the job. That's the whole job. Yes, sir. Vale walked away, and he did not look back, and every step of it was a performance of not looking back. Riley watched him go, and she understood completely, with no hope in it at all, that she had just made an enemy who would spend the rest of the day hunting through regulations for something to bury her with. Not out of hatred, out of something far more permanent and far more common than hatred. Out of embarrassment. Bannister had his orders. Now, and orders are a wonderful thing when you are 24 and unsure, because they replace the part of you that has doubts. Ma'am, last time. Step behind the line. No, and he reached out and took her by the arm to move her. He took the left one. What happened in Riley Vaughn's body then was white and total and had no words attached to it. 3 ribs that had been broken 40 hours ago and had spent every minute since grinding against each other went somewhere new. And she made a sound she had not made on the table, had not made in the water, had not made once in front of another human being in 5 years. And Titan moved. 70 pounds of German Shepherd came off the deck in a single silent explosion and stopped. Dead, 30 centimeters short of Cole Bannister's forearm hanging in the air, on nothing but a single word that Riley got out of a throat that was full of her own heartbeat. Ouse. He stopped. He stopped so completely that Bannister felt the air move against his hand and did not feel teeth. And for the rest of his life, he would understand that he had been given a gift in that instant by a woman who was in too much pain to stand. Then Titan backed up 2 steps, put himself between them again, and did not take his eyes off Bannister's hands. Bannister, Chief Petty Officer Marisol Delgado, had come out of the second security vehicle, already moving, 19 years in. She had exactly one talent that mattered on a station like this, and it was the ability to tell the difference between a problem and a situation, and she had known from 40 yards out which one this was. Get your hands off her, now. Chief, she won't. I said now. He let go. Riley folded. She caught herself on the aircraft with her right hand and stayed there gray-faced, breathing in short, shallow sips, because deep breaths were fire, and the dog pressed his whole body against her legs and held her up. What have we got? Delgado said. Unauthorized female, no ID, won't comply, standing at 216. Bannister's voice had gone tight and fast because his chief was here now, and he needed her to see it the way he saw it, needed it desperately. Claims to be a lieutenant, Vaughn. There's a working dog, no paperwork on the dog either. Commander Vale gave me a direct order to remove her. Vaughn, Delgado said. That's what she says. And Delgado looked at the woman, then at the dog, then at the harness, and she was close enough to read the stitching on it, and something moved at the very back of her mind. Not a memory yet, just the feeling of one. The shape of a word she couldn't quite reach. Ma'am, she said carefully, I need you to come inside with us and sort this out. I can't. You can, and you will. 5 minutes in the office, and if you're who you say you are, you'll be back out here, and I'll apologize to you personally in front of everybody on this line. Chief, Riley pushed herself upright, and it cost her, and Delgado watched exactly what it cost. Inside of 90 minutes, there's going to be a launch order for Saltgrave. When it comes, there's going to be one airframe on this station that can fly it. That one. There are 3 pilots in this wing who can put a hoist on that cliff in a crosswind. 2 of them are in Norfolk. If you take me off this flight line, that rock goes quiet and 5 men die on it, and it will be a completely reasonable thing that you did, and you will still have done it. Delgado hesitated, and Bannister saw her hesitate, and it did something to him that he was never proud of afterward, because his chief hesitating meant that maybe he had been wrong, and being wrong in front of Delgado was the thing he feared more than any intruder who had ever lived. So he did what frightened men do. He got louder to protect his own certainty. Chief, she's saying whatever she has to say. That's what they do. I know what they do. Every second we stand here, I know Bannister. But Riley had seen the hesitation too, and she made a decision, and it was the decision that broke the entire day open. Chief, call the tower. Delgado's eyes came up. Don't call the squadron. Don't call the duty officer. Don't run my name through a system that spits out a service number and means nothing to you. She was breathing carefully around the words. Call the tower. Tell them Vaughn is on the flight line. Just say my name to the tower and listen to what comes back. Ma'am, I'll put my hands up. I'll step behind the line. I'll do everything you've asked the second the call goes out, and if nothing happens, put me in a cell and I won't say another word. I'll be a problem you solved. I'll be your good day, Chief. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time in 11 minutes. Please, just say my name to the tower. Delgado turned to Bannister. Make the call. Chief, Petty Officer Bannister, give the tower the name. This is a waste of, That's an order. Delgado didn't raise her voice at all, which was infinitely worse. If it's nothing, we bag her, and I write it up myself, and you were right, and I'll say so. If it's something, then all 4 of us just avoided a very bad afternoon. Make the call. And here's the thing Cole Bannister would think about at 3 in the morning for the rest of his life. He did not want to make that call, not because he thought it was pointless, because some small, honest animal part of him, underneath all the training and all the hunger to finally matter, had begun to suspect he was wrong, and he did not want to find out. He keyed the radio anyway. Tower Patrol 2, we've got an individual on the flight line claiming to be aircrew. No identification, refusing to clear. She's asking us to relay a name to you. He glanced at her. She nodded once barely. The name is Vaughn, Lieutenant Riley Vaughn. Radio silence has a length to it, and everybody who works around aircraft knows the normal one. A beat, maybe 2. Then somebody comes back with copy or standby or say again. This one went 4 seconds. Bannister looked at the radio in his hand like it had died. Then the tower came back, and it was not the flat board voice of a controller reading traffic. It was too fast and too high, and underneath it, you could hear a room full of people going quiet all at once. Patrol 2 Tower, say again the name. Say the name again. Vaughn, Riley Vaughn. She says she's a lieutenant. She doesn't have any. Patrol 2, is there a dog? Answer me. Is there a dog with her? Something cold went straight down the back of Cole Bannister's neck in 106 degrees of heat. That's affirmative. There's a working dog. What color? Say again. What color is the dog patrolled to? He looked down at 70 pounds of tan gold and black standing between him and a woman he had shoved twice. Tan and black, he said slowly. German Shepherd. And the transmission that came back was not to him at all. It went out flat and wide across every frequency on the station at once, and it hit the ready room and the hangar bays and the maintenance line and the fuel farm and the galley in the same instant. All stations tower. All stations hold what you're doing. Hold. We may have air crew for 216 on the flight line. Across Iron Harbor work stopped. In the maintenance hangar, a 51-year-old senior chief named Elias Rourke was on his back under a tail rotor assembly with a torque wrench in his hand, and he heard that name come out of a speaker bolted to a girder 40 feet over his head, and for 3 entire seconds, he did not move at all. Then he set the wrench down on his own chest carefully, like it had gotten heavy, and said one word out loud to nobody. No. And then he was up and running, 51 years old, running flat out through his own hangar, and he clipped a rolling toolbox on the way and sent it over and did not stop and did not look back. In the ready room, 3 pilots halfway into their gear turned and looked at each other, and none of them said anything. In the tower, a 22-year-old controller 5 months into the job put her hand over her mouth, and out on the concrete, Chief Marisol Delgado's face changed. Riley watched it happen, watched the almost memory finally arrive, watched it land, watched 19 years of a career reassemble itself behind a woman's eyes in about a second and a half. Delgado's hand came off her sidearm. She took a step back, not away in fear, away in something much stranger and much older than fear. "Oh God," she said. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. It's all right." "It is not all right," she rounded on her own people. "Get back. Both of you, get back from her right now." Bannister stood exactly where he was with the radio still in his hand, and he did not understand, and he was the only human being on that entire flight line who did not understand. And that fact was about to become the worst 90 seconds of his life. Chief, who is she?" Delgado didn't answer. She was looking at Riley the way you look at something you were told about a long time ago and never expected to see with your own eyes. "Chief, you put your hands on her," Delgado said. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't know." "Then what am I supposed to?" "That's not the point, son." Her voice had gone almost gentle, which was the most frightening thing about it. "The point is that you did, and now we all get to live inside the next 10 minutes. Cole Bannister turned to the woman he had shoved. She'd straightened a little. One hand was still braced on the aircraft because her legs were doing about half their job, and the dog had shifted again. Not aggressive now, just closer, shoulder jammed against her thigh, taking weight, which was a thing he had been doing for 40 hours without ever once being asked. She wasn't looking at Bannister with triumph. He'd have preferred triumph. He could have survived triumph. He could have gone home and been angry and slept. She was looking at him with something that looked terribly like grief. Like she had watched this exact thing happen to some other young man on some other piece of hot concrete and had never gotten used to it and never would. "Who are you?" he asked. And this time it wasn't a demand. It came out of him small and cracked an actual question from an actual person. Maybe the first honest sentence he'd spoken in 11 minutes. Riley opened her mouth to answer him, and the tower cut across every frequency again before she could, and this time there was a second voice underneath the controllers. Older, heavier, unhurried in the specific way of a man who has been making life and death decisions for 30 years and long ago stopped needing to sound like it. Captain Marcus Hale, the base commander. Every crew chief on that line stopped moving. Every pilot half-zipped into a flight suit stood up, because when the base commander comes up on the tower net in person during a troops in contact, you do not breathe. You listen. Bannister didn't know it yet, but he was about to hear one single word come out of a speaker that he would carry with him until the day he died. A word that would explain the bruised woman in the borrowed trousers. A word that would explain why 400 people had just stopped working in the middle of a Tuesday. A word that meant more on that station than any rank or any badge or any name on any door. But before it came, there were 3 long seconds where nothing happened at all. 3 seconds where a 25-year-old lieutenant and a 24-year-old master-at-arms looked at each other across a gap that was 4 feet wide and about 1,000 miles deep. And in those 3 seconds, Riley Vaughn did something that no one standing on that flight line expected. She let go of the aircraft. She took one unsteady step toward the man who had shoved her twice, and she reached out with her good hand and put it on his shoulder. Hey, look at me. He couldn't. Cole, look at me. He did. His eyes were already wet, and he hated himself for it more than he had ever hated anything. Whatever you're about to start doing to yourself, don't. Her hand didn't move. You saw something that looked wrong, and you went toward it instead of away from it. That's not a character flaw. That's the only reason we keep people like you standing out here at all. I hurt you. On the wrong day in the wrong month, you'll be the only thing between this station and somebody who actually means it. And you'll do exactly what you just did. And you'll be right, and you'll be a hero, and nobody will ever hear one word about it. She let a breath out. Today you were wrong. That's all this is. You were wrong on a Tuesday. That happens to every single person who ever put this uniform on and actually did the work. I hurt you, he said again, and it came apart in the middle. My ribs were already broken. Something almost like a smile crossed her face and vanished. You didn't do that. The ocean did that. Delgado had her hand over her mouth. The 2 junior watchstanders had gone completely still. And out past the safety line, people had started to gather mechanics fuelers, a corpsman who had run the whole way from sickbay, 40 or 50 of them by now, standing at a distance. Nobody had asked them to keep watching a lieutenant in a sports bra and camouflage trousers hold onto the shoulder of the man who had just tried to arrest her. That was when the tower spoke again. Flight line tower, stand by for base command. And Captain Marcus Hale's voice came across the whole station, clear and slow, and absolutely certain. He did not ask a question. He did not make a request. He made a statement, and he made it to exactly one person using a word that turned Cole Bannister's blood to ice water in 106 degrees of heat. Ghost, this is Tower Actual. Do you read me? Riley Vaughn closed her eyes. Beside her chief, Delgado had already pulled the handheld off her own belt, and she pressed it into Riley's hand without a word, without being asked the way you hand a surgeon an instrument. And Bannister stared because he knew that name. Of course he knew that name. Every single person who had ever been stationed at Iron Harbor knew that name. It was on a plaque in the Heritage Room. It was in the stories the old maintainers told when they'd had 2 beers and the young sailors leaned in to listen. Ghost was the pilot who had gone into a trawler breakup at night in 40-knot winds with no horizon and pulled 7 men off a hull that rolled under her while the hoist was still down. Ghost was the pilot who had flown an airframe home from Kestrel Point with a hydraulic system that had stopped existing and put it on the deck hard enough to replace the gear and climbed out and finished her post-flight checklist before she let anyone look at her hands. Ghost was the pilot who had never, not one time, not in any weather, not on any mission, come home without the people she went out for. Ghost was a story. Ghost was the name you said when a new kid asked why this job was worth doing, and Ghost was standing 18 inches from Cole Bannister with a bruise on her face and a dog holding her upright, and he had called her a problem, and he had put his hands on her broken side twice, and a lieutenant commander had told her where the gym was, while 3 men laughed, and one of them filmed it. That's you, Bannister said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man's entire understanding of a morning collapsing and rebuilding itself in real time. You're Ghost. Riley Vaughn didn't answer him. She keyed the radio and her voice came out steady, even though her whole body had started to shake. Tower Actual Ghost. I read you. The name went through Iron Harbor the way current goes through water. It did not travel person to person. It arrived everywhere at once, and it did different things in different rooms, and every one of them mattered. In the galley, a 19-year-old culinary specialist who had been at that station for 5 weeks heard 400 conversations. Stop and ask the man beside him what was happening. And the man, a second class with 11 years in, did not answer him because he had put both hands flat on the steel counter and was breathing very carefully through his nose. In the fuel farm, a chief pulled the pin on a transfer she had been running for 20 minutes and started walking toward the flight line without telling anyone where she was going. In the ready room, one of the 3 pilots who had been suiting up in a desperate hurry to cover a mission none of them were fully qualified for, sat back down on the bench with his flight suit half-zipped and put his face in his hands, and the other 2 let him because they understood exactly what it was. It wasn't grief. It was the specific, humiliating, holy relief of a man who has been getting ready to do something he was almost certainly going to die trying and has just been told he doesn't have to. And out on the concrete, Cole Bannister stood 4 feet from a legend and discovered that shame is not a feeling. It's a physical event. It happens in your stomach, in your hands, in the back of your throat, and it does not care at all what your reasons were. Ghost Tower Actual. Hale's voice came again, flat and unhurried. I'm told you're on your feet. Is that accurate? Riley keyed the handheld. That's accurate, sir. Is that accurate, or is that what you'd like to be accurate? There was a pause, and every person within 30 yards heard her decide not to lie. I'm on my feet, sir. I'm on my feet the way a man walks on a broken ankle. It works until it doesn't. Somewhere behind her, Delgado closed her eyes. Stand by, Hale said. And then the net went quiet, and the quiet stretched, and in that stretched quiet, a 51-year-old senior chief came out of the hangar line at a dead run with his shirt half out of his trousers and no cover on his head, and he crossed 140 yards of open concrete without slowing down once. Elias Rourke had been fixing aircraft since before Riley Vaughn was born. He had a face like something left outside for a long time, and hands that had been broken and reset so many times they had stopped closing all the way, and in 29 years the men who worked for him had seen him raise his voice exactly 4 times. He came to a stop in front of her and looked at her, and his chest was heaving, and what came out of him was not any of the things anyone expected. You pulled the line out of your arm, Ox. Don't do that. Don't say my name like I'm a horse you're calming down. He was shaking. Everybody could see it. I sat in that ward with you for 6 hours. 6 hours, and I went to work this morning and I told my guys, she's stable, she's going to be all right. She's going to be mad about the ribs, but she'll be all right. And then I'm under a tail rotor and I hear your name come out of a speaker and I think his voice failed. He got it back. I thought you died and they were announcing it. Riley didn't say anything because there wasn't anything. That was the truth of it. There was nothing she could have said to a man who had cut her out of a seat once already that would have made any of it smaller. Rourke looked past her at the aircraft, then at the 2 security forces standing there, then at her ribs in her hand and the dog, and he did the arithmetic that every maintainer eventually learns to do, which is the arithmetic of what a machine is going to be asked to do and who is going to be inside it. Saltgrave, he said. Yeah. 216. Yeah. There's nobody else. There's nobody else, Ox. He stood there for a second, and then Senior Chief Elias Rourke, who had never in his life told an officer what to do, said the thing he'd regret for a decade and would never once take back. Then let's get her turning. Belay that. The voice came from behind them, and it was smooth, and it was reasonable, and it landed on that flight line like a dropped tool. Preston Vale had come back. I was not alone this time. He had a lieutenant with him, carrying a folder, and he was walking at a completely different pace than he had 11 minutes ago. And every single person watching understood immediately that he had spent those 11 minutes doing something. He had gone and gotten paper. Senior Chief stepped away from that airframe. Vale didn't look at Rourke when he said it. He was looking at Riley, and there was nothing on his face at all, which was somehow worse than the smirk had been. Lieutenant Vaughn is on a medical down check. Sir, signed at OH-740 this morning by the flight surgeon. 3 fractured ribs, a grade 2 concussion sustained 40 hours ago, and a note in the margin that says, and I'm quoting, patient is non-compliant. He held the folder up without opening it. She is grounded, not by me, by medicine. That's not an opinion as Senior Chief, that's a document. And here was the moment where the whole thing should have collapsed, because Preston Vale was not lying. He had not fabricated anything. He had walked into an office and asked for a piece of paper that already existed, and he had come back out with it, and every word on it was true. That was what made him dangerous. He never had to lie. He just had to be correct at the exact moment when being correct got somebody killed. Commander, Riley said, Lieutenant, you know what's on that rock. I know exactly what's on that rock, and I know what the regulation says about flying a concussed pilot into a night hoist evolution in deteriorating weather. He let a beat go by. I'd have thought you of all people would have some respect for what happens when somebody decides the rules are for other people. That landed. Everybody heard it land. Riley's jaw moved just slightly, and Rourke saw it and understood that Vale had gone into a personnel file too. Sir, respectfully, Bannister started. You, Vale said, are the reason we're standing out here in the first place, petty officer, and you'll want to be extremely careful about the next 12 hours of your life. Say nothing. Bannister shut his mouth, and then Preston Vale did the thing that would end him. He turned to the tower speaker, and he said in a voice loud enough to carry across the whole line, Tower, this is Commander Vale. Be advised the individual on the flight line is under a medical down check. I'm assuming the Saltgrave tasking. I'll take 216. The concrete went absolutely silent. Rourke's head came around slowly. Sir, he said, say that again. I said I'll take it. You'll take it. Is there a problem with your hearing, Senior Chief? No, sir. Rourke's voice had gone very flat and very careful. I just want it on the net twice is all, because when the board asked me, I want it clear I heard it twice. What board? The one they'll convene, Rourke said after. The tower came back before Vale could answer, and it was the young controller, and her voice had a wobble in it that she was fighting hard. Commander Vale Tower, confirming, sir, are you current for a night hoist on a cliff shelf? I need it for the log. Vale's mouth opened, and nothing came out. 2 seconds. 3. 4. 4 seconds is nothing anywhere else on Earth and on an open frequency in front of 400 people. It is an eternity with a floor and walls. Commander Tower, say again your qualification status. Tower, I have, he stopped, restarted. And this was the part that finished him because when he restarted, his voice had gone up. Not much, just enough. I have over 2,000 hours in type. Sir, that's not what I asked. Rourke turned his head and spat on the concrete, and it was the single most eloquent thing anyone did all morning. Commander Vale, Hale's voice cutting in from base command, and it was not loud and it was not angry, and it was the most terrifying sound Bannister had ever heard a human being produce. Answer the controller's question. The silence had a shape now. Everybody could feel where it was. Negative, Vale said, I am not current on the cliff shelf profile. Have you ever flown it? In training, sir. How long ago? Sir, I don't see how. How long ago, Commander? 2019. And that was it. That was the whole man laid out flat on an open net in front of the entire station. And the awful thing, the thing that made it tragedy instead of comedy, was that Preston Vale had not been trying to steal glory. Not really. Some part of him, some tired 11 years of almost part of him, had genuinely thought that if he could just get his hands on that aircraft, if he could just be the one, then all of it would finally stop hurting. He'd have gone out there, he'd have tried, and he'd have killed himself and 5 men on a rock in the dark, and he'd have done it believing he was the hero of it. Commander Hale said, You'll return to your spaces and remain there. We'll speak later. Vale didn't move for a second. Then he handed the folder to the lieutenant beside him, and he walked away, and this time nobody watched him go, and that was worse than the flinch, and he knew it. Ghost Tower Actual. Go ahead, sir. That down check is real. Yes, sir. I can override a flight surgeon. I've done it twice in 30 years, and I regretted one of them for 11 years, and the other one I do again tomorrow. A pause. I am not going to override it on your word. You'd tell me you were fine if your arm was off. Every one of you would. So we're going to do something else. Sir, you're going to show me. What happened next took 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and about 60 people watched it, and none of them ever forgot a second of it. The flight surgeon came out. His name was Lieutenant Commander Aaron Pike, and he was 34, and he was furious, and he arrived on the flight line with a corpsman and a bag in the specific rage of a doctor whose patient has walked out of his ward. Lieutenant Vaughn, sir, you pulled a line out of your own arm. I did. Do you understand that I could have you? Sir, she turned to face him fully, and the effort of it showed, and she did it anyway. You can be angry at me all day. You've earned it. But right now, you're the only person on this station whose opinion is going to decide whether 5 men come home, and I need you to stop being angry at me for about 4 minutes and be a doctor instead, please. Pike stopped. Something went across his face that was not softening. It was something better than softening. It was a professional deciding to be a professional. Fine, he said. Then we do it my way, and you don't argue with one single thing I say. Yes, sir. He tested her the way you test a concussion, which is to say he tested her balance and her tracking and her memory and her reaction time, and he did not make any of it easy, and he did not let her rest between items. He had her walk heel to toe along a painted line for 30 feet. She wavered twice. She corrected both times. Titan walked beside her the entire way, shoulder against her thigh. And the second time she wavered, he moved into her before she moved, and Pike saw it, and his eyes narrowed because he knew exactly what he had just watched. He had watched a dog compensate for a deficit that hadn't fully expressed itself yet. That dog is doing some of that for you. He is. You're not going to have him in the seat. He'll be on the deck behind me, sir, same as always. He had her read the emergency procedures for a hydraulic failure. Then he had her read them backward from the bottom item up, and that one is nastier than it sounds because it breaks the muscle memory and makes you actually think, and a concussed brain falls apart on it. She got it, all 14 items. She got the 11th one wrong, corrected herself before he could say anything, and finished. Again. You did it again, Lieutenant. She did it again. 14 for 14. Sweat had gone through the waistband of her trousers. Her face had gone the color of paper. And she stood there in front of a doctor who was trying to keep her alive and did not complain once. And about 60 people watched a 25-year-old woman with 3 broken ribs pass a neurological exam standing up in 106 degrees. Bannister found that he had stopped breathing normally somewhere around the second recitation. Last thing, Pike said. Close your eyes, arms out. Stand on your left foot. Sir, my ribs are on the left. I know where your ribs are. That's why I picked it. 30 seconds. She closed her eyes. She got to 19 seconds and started to go. And Titan was there before her weight shifted, before it not, after a full half-beat, early 70 pounds of dog, jamming his shoulder into the back of her knee to buy her the correction, and she got her foot back down and her eyes open, and she stood there breathing like she'd run a mile. That's a fail, Pike said quietly. Yes, sir. That's a hard fail. You know that. I know that, Dad. And Pike stood there with his hands on his hips and his jaw working, and everybody on that flight line watched a doctor go to war with himself in public. Ghost Tower Actual, Hale, Doc, give it to me straight and give it to me now, because I've got a JTAC on the rock who's asked me twice in 6 minutes where his helicopter is. Pike keyed the handheld Delgado handed him. His hand was not steady. Sir, this is Pike. She failed the last item. She's got a vestibular deficit. If she pulls G in a turn, there is a real chance she grays out for 2-3 seconds. He swallowed. That's the medicine, sir. That's my honest answer, and it's the answer that grounds her. Understood. Sir, Pike closed his eyes. Permission to say the other thing. Say it. The other thing is that I've been doing this 11 years, and I've never seen anybody pass items 1 through 5 in her condition. Not close. And the other thing is I sat in a ward with her 2 nights ago while she asked me 4 separate times whether the man her dog pulled out of the water was going to walk again, and she never once asked me about herself. Not one time, sir. His voice had gone thick. And the other thing is that if you send anybody else out there tonight, I'm going to be receiving them in pieces. So I can give you the medicine, or I can give you the truth, but sir, I cannot give you both. And I need you to be the one who picks. That's above my pay grade, and I'm asking you to take it. There was a long silence on the net. Doc Hale said, That's the most honest thing anybody said to me in a year. Sir, Ghost. Go ahead, sir. The down check is overridden by my authority and mine alone, and it's going in the log with my name on it and no one else's. If this goes wrong, it's me. Not Pike, not Rourke, not the tower. A pause, and when he came back, the 30 years were audible in it. Take 216, go get our people. The flight line came apart into motion. Rourke was already moving, shouting over his shoulder at men who were already running, and a fuel truck that had been idling swung around, and somewhere a klaxon started, and the 3 pilots came pouring out of the ready room in their half-zipped suits. And when they saw who was standing at 216, when they understood who was flying, they stopped, and they came to attention. The one who had been sitting on the bench with his face in his hands was the first to salute, and he held it, and then the second one did it, and then the third, and then the fuelers did it, and then the maintainers did it, and then Delgado did it, and then 200 people on a flight line in 106 degrees were standing at attention for a 25-year-old woman in a sports bra and camouflage trousers with a dog against her leg. And Cole Bannister found that his own arm was coming up. He didn't order it. He watched it happen. His hand went to his brow, and he was saluting the woman he had called a problem. The woman he had shoved twice, and everything in his chest turned over at once. Riley looked at all of them. And for about a second and a half, the thing she kept behind her face came loose. Her eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together hard and nodded once sharp the way you nod when you don't trust your own voice. Then she turned to the aircraft and it was over, and she was working. Rourke was at the door with a helmet bag and a set of gloves. He didn't ask if she was all right. He'd known her too long for that. Fuel's topped. Hoist checked twice this morning. I did it myself. Number two's got about 40 hours on a new module. She'll run a hair-warm don't chase it. He put the helmet in her hands. She's ready. She's been ready. She's been sitting out here for 6 days waiting on you. I know, Riley said. I could feel it. Rourke almost smiled. Yeah, you always could. Then he leaned in close enough that only she could hear it under the rising whine. Riley. He never used her first name. Not once in 4 years. You come home. You do the job and you come home. I cut you out of a seat once. I'm not doing it twice. His hands had closed on her forearm, and they were not steady. I'm 51 years old, and I've buried 3 of you. I'm full. You understand me? I'm full up. I'll come home, Ox. Say it right. I always come home, she said. That's the whole point of me. He held her eyes for one more second. Then he let go and stepped back and became a senior chief again because there was nothing else to be. Getting into the aircraft nearly ended it. She got her right foot up and her right hand on the frame and pulled, and the left side of her body simply stopped participating. She hung there with her whole weight on one arm and one foot, and the world went sideways and gray at the edges, and she could not go up and could not go down. Nobody on that flight line moved. 200 people watched a woman hang off the side of a helicopter and could not think of one thing to do about it that wouldn't take her legs out from under her worse. And then Cole Bannister walked forward. He did not touch her. He had learned that lesson down to the bone and would carry it for 30 years. He came in underneath her close and put his hands up, half raised, and planted his feet. He stayed there, a young man who had been ready to arrest her 9 minutes ago, standing under her with his arms out, ready to break her fall with his own body. Riley looked down at him. Petty officer? Ma'am? Thank you. Ma'am, I don't have anything you should be thanking me for. His voice was in pieces. I put my hands on you twice. I've been standing out here trying to figure out how a person lives with that. You were doing your job, and right now you're doing another one. She got a breath in around the fire in her side. You're making sure I don't fall. That's a good job, Cole. That's a good job, and I want you to remember you did it. She went up the rest of the way. Titan went in ahead of her. He always did. He had done it 400 times and turned and waited. And when she got herself into the seat, he pushed his head under her right hand and held it there for 3 seconds. And she took the 3 seconds, and then she put the helmet on, and the world went narrow and clean and quiet the way it always did the instant she was strapped in. Rourke came up and did her straps himself. He cinched them down over 3 broken ribs while she gritted her teeth and made no sound at all. And when he was done, he put his palm flat on the top of her helmet. For a second, the way a man does when he doesn't have words, and then he was gone. Down on the deck, Bannister backed off to the safety line and stood there. The first engine lit with a sound he felt in his sternum. Then the second, and the aircraft came alive and started straining against itself like something that wanted to run. And through the window, he could see her hands moving over the panel with a speed and a certainty that had nothing whatsoever to do with the broken body he had seen on the concrete 11 minutes ago. A person completely and totally in her element. A person who had finally, after everything, gotten back to the only place she had ever really been all right. Tower Ghost 216. Her voice came across the net, and it was strong and level, and it filled the frequency like something rising, ready to lift. And the tower came back, and the whole flight line was listening, and every pilot was still at attention. Ghost 216 Tower, you're cleared. Winds are 220 at 14. Weather's moving faster than forecast. You've got about 90 minutes of window, and then it shuts. The sky's yours, ma'am. A pause, and then hail one last time from base command. Godspeed, Ghost. The aircraft came up off the deck, and Cole Bannister stood at the safety line with his hands at his sides, and tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face, and did not know he was crying. He whispered something nobody heard. He said it to a woman who was already gone and already too loud to hear anything but her own rotors. Come home, he said. Please come home. And then she was out over the water and climbing, and the sound rolled back across the station long after the aircraft had turned into a dark speck. Bannister watched until there was nothing, and when he turned around, Chief Delgado was standing right behind him. Chief, not now. I need to say, not now, son. It wasn't cruel. It was the least cruel she had ever sounded. She's in the air. There's a job up there, and there's a boss down here. You can come apart later. Right now, you walk with me. Where? Command post. She was already moving. Because you and I are the last two people who put hands on that woman before she launched, and the captain is going to want to hear exactly what happened out here. And I would much rather he hear it from us than from the 40 people who were standing around with their phones out. Bannister's stomach dropped straight through the concrete. He wants to see me. He wants to see both of us. They walked, and the whole way across that flight line, Bannister felt the eyes. Maintainers looked at him and looked away. An armorer with gray in his mustache stopped dead and stared at him with open contempt and did not bother to hide it, and it landed like a slap, and he took it because what else was there, he wanted to explain. She had no badge. She wouldn't comply. A commander gave me a direct order. And he understood walking that none of it mattered. The story was already out. The story was already moving through this station faster than he could ever walk. And the story was simple. A kid in security forces put his hands on Ghost and tried to arrest her while 5 Americans bled out on a rock. That was the story, and every word of it was true. The command post was cold and dark and loud with radio traffic, and it took his eyes a second. There were maybe 15 people in there, and every one of them was locked onto a screen or a speaker, and at the center of it, arms folded, was a big silver-haired man with a face like weathered stone, who did not look at Bannister for a long time. Captain Marcus Hale was listening. Ghost 216's feet wet passing 40 miles, a controller said. Weather's building on her nose, estimating 22 minutes to the objective. 22 minutes, Hale said mostly to himself. Then he turned and his eyes found Delgado, and then they found Bannister, and Bannister felt those eyes go through him like something medical. You, sir, you're the one who called it in. Yes, sir. Tell me what happened, all of it. Don't clean it up, I'll know. So he told him. He told him about the woman with no badge, about ordering her back, about her refusing, about calling for backup. And then because Hale had said not to clean it up, he told him the part that was going to live in him forever, that he had grabbed her by the broken side, that she had made a sound that he had kept pushing until Delgado stopped him, and that he had done it a second time after a commander told him to. Hale listened to every word without moving. And when it was over, there was a silence in that room that Bannister stood inside of and waited to be destroyed by. Petty Officer Bannister, how long have you been on my station? 7 months, sir. So you got here after Vaughn deployed. You never saw her come and go. You never heard the word ghost except maybe off a plaque. Hale's eyes hadn't moved. That fair? Yes, sir, that's fair. So a woman with no ID, bruised in the wrong clothes, standing at a restricted aircraft. Your training said threat. You acted on it. He came a few steps closer, and up close he was bigger and older and harder. And you were right to check. Bannister blinked. Sir, you heard me? If that had been a real intruder, and you'd let her stand at my aircraft because the paperwork felt awkward, I'd be having a very different conversation with you, and it would end with you out of my Navy. Hale's voice dropped. The instinct wasn't the failure, son. The failure is that she handed you the tool to fix it, and you wouldn't pick it up. She told you to call the tower. She told you 3 times, and you didn't because your pride had already voted. Bannister's eyes were burning. Yes, sir. Now here's the question I actually care about. Hale studied him. Half the young men I've met would walk out of here hating that woman, blaming her, telling themselves she should have had a badge she couldn't have had. Is that where you are? No, sir. It came out fast, faster than he meant it to. No, sir, he stopped. His jaw worked. She put her hand on my shoulder, sir, after I heard her, when the whole thing came out about who she was, and I was standing there like an idiot. She put her hand on my shoulder and told me not to do the thing I was already starting to do to myself. She was hurt, sir. She was about to fly something that could kill her, and she spent part of that on me. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist and didn't care who saw. So no, sir, I don't hate her. I'd walk through fire for her, and she doesn't owe me one single thing. Hale looked at him for a long moment, and something in that stony face shifted just faintly right around the eyes. That he said quietly, is exactly the kind of person she is. And now you know why grown men saluted a woman in borrowed boots. He turned back toward the plot. Stay here, petty officer. Both of you, you started this with her. You'll see it through. You're going to stand in this room and hear every second of it, and you're going to pray harder than you've ever prayed for anything. Yes, sir. And then the speaker crackled, and every head in that room came around at once, because the voice coming through it was hers. Command Ghost 216, I'm 12 out. I've got the weather ahead of me, and it's worse than briefed ceilings coming down fast. A pause, and her voice changed, got harder, got faster. Somebody get me the JTAC on the rock right now. I need to know what I'm flying into. Ghost Command Actual, patching you to Cutlass. And a new voice came onto the net, and it was nothing like the controllers in that cold, dark room. It was young, and it was strained, and behind it faint and flat and wrong. You could hear gunfire coming through a radio. Any aircraft, this is Cutlass. We are troops in contact. Say again, troops in contact. We've got 4 down and 1 unaccounted for, and we are out of options down here. Does anybody copy? Bannister's whole body went cold. That was a real man in a real place. And he was afraid you could hear it. You could hear the whole thing in 4 seconds of a stranger's voice. And Cole Bannister would carry that sound with him for the rest of his life. And then Riley Vaughn answered, and everything in her voice was gone. The exhaustion, the pain, the 11 minutes on hot concrete, all of it wiped clean. What came through the speaker was warm and absolutely unshakable. Cutlass, this is Ghost. I hear you, brother. I've got you. A beat. I'm inbound to your position. I've got a hoist and a doll and about 80 minutes of weather, and I am going to make your day considerably better. Now talk to me. Tell me exactly what you need. The kid on the other end of that radio was 23 years old, and his name was Petty Officer Second Class, Marcus Doyle, and he had been alone with 4 broken men for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and the sound Riley Vaughn's voice made in his chest was something he would never be able to explain to anyone afterward. He tried 3 times to answer her and got nothing out. Cutlass, take a breath, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Take a breath and give it to me 1 piece at a time. Ghost, okay. His voice steadied by about 10%, which was everything. We're on the North Shelf. 6 of us came in, 5 accounted for. I've got 2 gunshot wounds, 1 crush injury from a rockfall. One's bad, ma'am. He's bad. He's been going in and out for 40 minutes, and I don't know what to do for him anymore. That's 4. Where's your 5th? There was a pause on that rock that lasted 3 seconds and cost Doyle something. Chief Amara went off the shelf when the first burst came in. He fell into the scree field maybe 30-40 feet down into the rocks. His beacon's dead and his radio's dead, and I can hear him, ma'am. Doyle's voice broke wide open. I can hear him down there. I've been calling and he doesn't answer, but I can hear something moving and I can't get to him. I've tried 4 times. There's no footing. And if I go down there, I leave 4 men who can't move. In the command post, nobody breathed. Hale had both hands flat on the plot table and his head down. Cutlass, Riley said, and there was no change in her, at all, none. You did the right thing every one of those 4 times. You hear me? You stayed with the 4 you could reach. That's the call. That's the only call. Nobody in this Navy is going to tell you different, and if they try, you send them to me. Ma'am, I've got a dog on this aircraft who has found 11 people in scree. 11. His name's Titan, and he does not care about footing. A beat. I'm going to get your chief. That's a promise from me to you, and I don't make those. Now give me your shelf. How wide? How deep? What's the wind doing on your face? And Cole Bannister, standing at the back of a cold, dark room with no right to be there, watched a woman with 3 broken ribs take a terrified 23-year-old apart and put him back together in 90 seconds without ever once raising her voice. The weather beat her to the rock by 4 minutes. Command Ghost. Ceilings on the deck. I've got maybe 200 feet and it's closing. Her voice had gone clipped. I'm not going to be able to hold a high hover. I'm going to have to come in under it along the water and turn up the face. The controller beside Hale said quietly and to nobody, That's a box canyon approach. I know what it is, Hale said. Sir, if she loses an engine in there. I know what it is, Petty Officer. Command Ghost. Riley again. Say your last. I caught part of that. Hale keyed it. Ghost Command Actual. Your man's right. If you turn up that face and you lose power, you have no out. No auto-rotation, no water underneath you, nothing but rock in every direction. I want that said out loud on this net before you do it. Understood, sir. That's not an argument. That's me making sure you heard it. I heard it 40 hours ago, sir, Riley said. That's how I got the ribs. And that was the first time anybody in that room laughed, and it was one short, shocked sound out of the ops officer, and it died immediately, and the silence after it was worse. She went in. The first two came up fast and fast was the only mercy anybody got that day. She put the aircraft into a hover with the rotor disc closer to that cliff face than any manual on Earth would allow. And Doyle got the first gunshot wound into the strop, and the hoist ran. And a man who had been bleeding on a rock for 2 hours came up through 100 feet of wind and got dragged into the cabin by a crew chief named Torres, who had done this 900 times and had never once done it in a hover this tight. One aboard, Torres called. Ghost, he's talking. He's asking about his glasses. Tell him we'll bill him. The second came up the same way, and that one was the crush injury, and he screamed the whole way, and everybody on the net heard it, and nobody said a word about it. Two aboard, and then the third one went wrong. The wind came off the shelf sideways, a sheer, a slab of moving air that had been building against the face for an hour, and it hit the aircraft as the strop was 30 feet off the rock with a man in it, and the whole airframe slid. Bannister heard it happen through the radio. Not words, just the sound of an engine note changing and a woman's breathing going fast and shallow. Cable's fouling. Ghost, he's swinging, he's going into the face. Torres, don't cut. Do not cut. Ma'am, do not cut that cable. I'm bringing him off it. And she did something with an aircraft that Torres tried to describe at the debrief 3 days later and gave up on halfway through because there was no vocabulary for it. She pushed into the sheer instead of away from it, which is the exact opposite of every instinct a pilot has. And she used it, and the man on the end of that cable swung out over the water instead of into a wall of rock. Then she pulled him up. And in the 2 seconds after, in the quiet where nobody in the command post had started breathing again, yet they all heard something they were not supposed to hear. They heard her make a sound. It was small. It was cut off almost immediately. It was the sound of a woman with 3 broken ribs, having just pulled somewhere between 2 and 3G in a hard lateral, and it was the first crack in a wall that had held for 2 hours. Hale's head came up. Ghost command, status. 3 aboard. That's not what I asked. Silence. Lieutenant Vaughn, that is not what I asked. Sir. Her voice came back tight and controlled and about half a step slower than it had been. I grayed out for about 1.5 seconds in that turn, maybe 2. I've got the aircraft. It's back. Pike, who had refused to leave the command post, who had planted himself against the back wall with his arms folded and had not moved in 20 minutes, pushed off the wall. Sir, that's the deficit. That's exactly what I told you would happen. I know what you told me. Sir, she needs to dock. Hale didn't turn around. What do you want me to do? Tell me the sentence. Say the words you want me to say into that microphone right now with 2 men still on that rock. Pike stood there. And then Lieutenant Commander Aaron Pike, flight surgeon, 11 years in, sat down on a folding chair against the back wall of a command post and put his face in his hands and did not say anything else for a long time. The 4th man was the bad one. Ghost, he's not tracking anymore. Doyle's voice had gone flat, which was worse than panic. His breathing changed about 4 minutes ago. It's doing that thing. You know the thing I mean. I know the thing you mean. She didn't soften it, and she didn't lie to him. Get him in the strop. Don't wait for a good moment. There isn't one. Ma'am, if I move him, he dies on that rock in 11 minutes, or he dies in a helicopter with an IV in him. Move him. Doyle moved him, and when that 4th man came up through the door and Torres got hands on him, the crew chief keyed his mic and said one word, and the word was fast. How fast? Ghost, we need to go. Now, right now. And this was the moment. Everybody in the command post understood it in the same half second, and so did Riley Vaughn, and so did a 23-year-old standing alone on a rock in the dark, 4 men in the back, one of them dying with a clock on him measured in minutes. 10 minutes to the ship, 22 to Iron Harbor, and a chief petty officer named Amara, somewhere down in a scree field with a dead radio alive or not, nobody could say. Go in the 4 live. Amara becomes a body they recover in a week if the weather ever lets them. Stay, and you gamble a man who is actively dying against a man who might already be dead. Hale reached for the microphone. He got his hand on it, and he did not key it, and he stood there, and every person in that room watched a 30-year captain fail to give an order for 4 full seconds. Command Ghost. She beat him to it. I'm putting Doyle and my dog on the shelf, and I'm running your 4 to the ship, and I'm coming back. Hale keyed. Say again. Torres goes down on the hoist with Titan. Doyle stays. They work the scree field while I run the wounded out. It's 10 minutes to the ship deck, 10 back, 22 minutes total, and nobody dies waiting on a decision. You're going to leave 3 people on a rock in weather. Yes, sir. With a storm front, that shuts the window in 50 minutes. Yes, sir. And if that window shuts early, Lieutenant, I have got 3 more people on that rock instead of 1, and I can't get any of them, and I get to write 4 letters instead of 1. Hale's knuckles were white. Tell me why I let you do that. And Riley Vaughn said the thing that Cole Bannister would repeat to young sailors for the next 20 years of his life. Because if I take off with that man still down there, and I get everyone home safe, sir, I still don't get to be somebody who came home. Not really. And neither does Doyle, and he's 23, and he'll carry it a lot longer than I will. A pause. You told Petty Officer Bannister this morning that the instinct wasn't the failure. Sir, this is the instinct. I'm asking you to let me have it. Hale closed his eyes. Do it, he said. Torres went down first, and then they lowered the dog. That was the part the whole command post heard, and it was the part that broke people who had held together through everything else. Because they had a hot mic in that cabin, and before Riley Vaughn put her dog on a hoist cable and lowered him 100 feet onto a rock in the dark in 40 knots of wind, she talked to him. She didn't use a command voice. She used the other one. Hey, buddy, look at me. A pause, and you could hear something in her throat. I know you're tired. I know you haven't eaten. I know your foot hurts, and I'm asking you anyway, and that's not fair, and I'm doing it anyway. Nothing on the net. There's a man down there. He's got a family, and he's got about an hour, and you're the only one who can find him. So you go with Torres, and you find him, and you hold on, and I am coming back for you. Her voice cracked straight down the middle, and she did not stop. I am coming back for you. 20 minutes. You hold 20 minutes for me. And then steady such. And a dog with a torn pad who hadn't eaten in 41 hours went out the door of a helicopter into the weather without hesitating for 1 single second. And there wasn't a person in that command post who could look at anybody else. Delgado had turned away from the room entirely. Bannister found that his hand had gone over his mouth at some point, and he had no memory of putting it there. 3 on the shelf, Torres called. Ghost, we're clear, go. 20 minutes, Torres. Yes, ma'am. 20 minutes. Go, ma'am. And she went. So, yeah. She put 4 wounded men onto the deck of a destroyer in 9 minutes and 40 seconds, and the ship's medical team said afterward that the 4th man, the bad one, arrived with a pulse they could not find and a corpsman's hands on his chest, and that he was alive 26 hours later, and that if the transit had gone 11 minutes instead of 9, he would not have been. 2 minutes. That was the margin. That was the entire distance between a man's daughter having a father and not. She did not shut down on that deck. She did not get out. A ship's corpsman climbed up to the door with a bag and shouted at her over the rotors, and she waved him off, and he shouted again, and Torres wasn't there to stop her, and neither was anybody else. Command Ghost. 4 delivered, all alive on handoff. I'm turning. Ghost command. Hale and his voice had changed. Say your fuel. I'm fine on fuel, sir. Say your fuel. A pause. I'm carrying enough to get back to the shelf, recover 3, and make Iron Harbor with about 11 minutes of reserve. If the weather makes me go the long way around the front, that reserve goes to 0. Another pause. And sir, before you say it, there's no tanker in the world that's going to be in position. That ship can't refuel me in under 20 minutes, and Titan has been down there for 11 of the 20 I promised him. So I'm turning now. Ghost. Sir, I'm turning now. And she hung up on a base commander in the middle of a sentence, which is a thing that had happened to Marcus Hale exactly once in 30 years. And he stood there looking at a dead microphone with an expression nobody in that room could read. Then he set it down. Get me the weather, he said, every 20 seconds. I want to know the second that front moves. 9 minutes back, and every one of them was a year. At the 6-minute mark, Doyle came up on the net, and he was not steady anymore. Ghost Cutlass, the dog's got something. He's got something. He went straight down into a fissure about 20 meters below us, and he's not coming out, and Torres can't get eyes on him. Is he alerting? He's, ma'am, I can't tell. I can't see anything. Doyle, is he alerting? He's not moving. He went in and he stopped, and he hasn't moved in 90 seconds. And Riley Vaughn in an aircraft 9 minutes out alone, with 3 broken ribs and a brain that had grayed out on her. Once already heard that a dog she had raised from 14 months old had gone into a hole in a rock and stopped moving, and her voice came back over that net, and there was not one thing wrong with it. That's an alert. That's exactly what an alert looks like. He's found him, and he's lying on him. A beat. Torres, get to that fissure. He's not hurt. He's holding position on a live man, and he won't move until I tell him to. Get down there. Ma'am, if it's not Torres. Something came into her voice then that nobody on that net had heard all day. That's my dog. Get down there. Chief Petty Officer Elijah Amara had been unconscious for most of 2 hours and awake for parts of it, and what he remembered afterward was not the fall and not the cold. What he remembered was that something warm had come down out of the dark and lain down on top of him and would not get off, and that it had been breathing against his neck, and that for the first time in 2 hours he had stopped being alone. I had a compound fracture in his right femur, 4 broken ribs of his own, and a skull fracture that would take him out of the Navy inside a year. I've got him. Torres and he was shouting and the wind was tearing at it. Ghost, I've got him. He's alive. He's alive. The dog's on top of him. I can't get him off. Say the word Frey, F-R-E-I. Say it once firmly and don't reach past him. Frey, a pause. He moved. Ghost, he moved off. He's ma'am. He's standing between me and the guy. He's not letting me. He'll let you. Say his name first. He needs to know you know him. Titan, Titan, good boy. Okay, he's letting me in. Torres was breathing like a man who'd run up a hill. Ghost, this man is broken up bad, but he's talking. He's asking who the dog belongs to. And in the command post, somebody started crying, and it turned out to be the 22-year-old controller from the tower who had left her post at shift change and walked to that room and stood against the wall for 40 minutes because she could not make herself go home. The front moved 11 minutes early. The weather petty officer said it out loud in a flat voice. Front's inside the window, sir. She's got maybe 14 minutes. And Hale put a hand on the plot table and said one word under his breath that nobody in that room ever repeated. Ghost command actual. Weather's moved. You've got 14 minutes to be off that rock and headed home, and after that it closes and it does not open again for 9 hours. Copy 14. Ghost, that's not a target. That's a wall. Copy 14, sir. She came up that face for the second time in a ceiling that had come down another 80 feet since the first, and this time she did not have Torres in the cabin to run the hoist. So a 23-year-old JTAC who had never worked a hoist in his life did it from the ground on her instructions, shouted over a net one word at a time. Amara came up first because Amara was the reason. Then Torres. And then there was one thing left on that rock, and 11 minutes on the clock, and Riley Vaughn put the aircraft into a hover that Torres would later swear held to within about 2 feet and 40 knots of shifting wind, and she brought her dog up on a cable through the dark. Nobody said anything on the net while it ran. The hoist took 51 seconds. Aboard, Torres said, and his voice was completely wrecked. Ghost, everybody's aboard. Everybody, Titan's aboard. And they heard her say it, a hot mic in a cabin unguarded, not meant for anybody. Good boy, oh, good boy, good boy. She was 70 seconds off that rock when the last of it happened, and it happened so fast that nobody afterward could agree on the order. There was a sound through the net that was not weather. Then Torres and he was screaming, "We're taking fire, Ghost. We're taking fire, left side." And then a hard concussive bang that came through a hot microphone into a cold, dark room 108 miles away and made every person in it flinch as one body. And then nothing. Dead net. Bannister felt his vision start to tunnel and grabbed the edge of the plot table with both hands. Ghost command, come in. Nothing. Ghost 216, this is command actual. Respond. Nothing. 5 seconds. 8, 11. Riley. Hale had stopped being a captain somewhere in there, and nobody in that room ever mentioned it again. Riley, answer me. 15 seconds. Delgado had both hands over her face. Pike was on his feet again. The controller had stopped crying and was standing absolutely rigid, staring at the speaker with her mouth open. And Cole Bannister, who had shoved this woman twice, who had called her a problem, who had been ready to put her in a cell at 9:40 in the morning, heard himself praying out loud in a room full of officers and did not know he was doing it. 22 seconds. And then the net came alive with a burst of static and a woman's voice underneath it, and it was strained, and it was breathing wrong, and it was absolutely unmistakably alive. Command Ghost. A ragged gulp of air. I'm here, sorry, had my hands full. The room did not cheer. That's the thing people got wrong when they told the story later. Nobody cheered. The room made a sound like something letting go. Ghost, say your status. Hale's voice had gravel all through it. Say your status right now. Everybody in the back is alive. Torres is alive. Amara's alive. Doyle's alive. The dog's alive. She stopped to breathe, and it took her too long. Somebody on that ridge had a rifle, and they put rounds through the left side as I pulled off. I've got warning lights I don't like, sir. I've got a chip light on number 2, and I've got... She stopped. The pause went 4 seconds. Ghost. Sir, I've got a fuel indication that's dropping faster than it should be. Hale went very, very still. Say that again. I said my fuel is going down faster than it should be, sir. Her voice was perfectly level, and it was the levelness that put ice into every person in that room, because it was the levelness of somebody who has already run the numbers twice and understood exactly what they say. I'm doing the math right now. I've got 108 miles of water between me and Iron Harbor. I've got a front siding across the direct route, and I've got 4 souls and a dog in the back who all just survived the worst day of their lives. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Sir Riley Vaughn said, I need to tell you the truth about my situation. They kept her for 11 days. The landing had cost more than she'd admitted on the causeway. 2 of the fractured ribs had displaced. There was internal bleeding the doctors watched with faces they tried very hard to keep neutral. The hearing in her left ear came back over 9 days and never came all the way back. And Aaron Pike, who had signed the down check she flew through, came to her room every single morning and read her the list of things that could have killed her in order out loud, and Riley Vaughn listened politely and did not apologize once. On the 4th morning, he stopped in the doorway and said what he'd been carrying. I want you to know I would have grounded you. If the captain hadn't taken it off me, I would have grounded you, and 5 men would be dead, and I would have been right. You would have been right, she agreed. That's the part I can't get past. Doc. She pushed herself up a little, and it hurt, and she did it anyway. You gave him the medicine, and you gave him the truth, and then you told him it wasn't yours to pick. That's the hardest thing anybody did that day, and it was you. She held his eyes. You didn't fail. You did the job correctly, and it happened to be a job nobody should have to do. Go home and hold your kids. Pike stood in that doorway for a second longer. Then he said, yes, ma'am, to a lieutenant, which he had never done in his life, and walked out. So, Titan came out of surgery on the 2nd night. A fragment had gone into the muscle of his right hind leg, somewhere in the last 30 seconds over Saltgrave, and nobody had known, not Torres, not Doyle, not Riley, because he had not made a sound and had not limped until the aircraft stopped moving on Route 9. 48 hours. A dog with steel in his leg had gone down a cliff into a fissure, lain across a broken man for 11 minutes and come up a cable, and had not told anyone. The veterinary surgeon, a lieutenant commander named Osei, explained afterward that the leg would work, but never quite the same, that he'd be stiff in cold weather, that there was no scenario in which he went back to full duty. Riley took it without moving. He'll walk fine. Then that's the whole thing, she said. The rest is paperwork. Elijah Amara compound, femur 4 ribs, skull fracture on the floor above. Herr got himself into a wheelchair on day 6 and made an ensign push him down 2 floors and into the veterinary ward, which was against about 9 regulations, and he sat in front of a kennel for 20 minutes with his hands over his face. Then he said to a dog, I heard you breathing. That's all I had for 2 hours. I heard you breathing on my neck. Titan put his nose through the mesh and left it there. Amara's wife found him like that 40 minutes later and did not say a word about it then or ever. Cole Bannister came every day. The first day he stood in her doorway for a full minute and almost turned around 3 separate times, because who was he? What right did he have? What does a man say? And Riley watched him hover and finally said, "Are you going to stand in that door all afternoon, petty officer, or are you going to come in here and talk to me? I've read every magazine in this room twice, and I'm losing my mind." So he came in and sat down, and it was excruciating, both of them, stepping around the enormous thing in the middle of the room. She didn't let it stay that way. She asked him where he was from. He said Ohio. She asked why he joined, and he gave her the recruiting poster answer, and she looked at him until he gave her the real one. "I didn't want to be a guy nothing ever happened to," he said. "That's it. That's the whole reason. My dad's a machinist, and his dad was a machinist, and they're good men, and nothing ever happened to either of them, and I couldn't stand it." Riley nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "something happened to you." He laughed. It came out wrong, half a sob, and she let him have it. On the second day, he brought her coffee and got it exactly right, and when she raised an eyebrow, he confessed he'd asked Rourke, and she told him that was precisely the kind of initiative the Navy claimed to value and almost never rewarded. By the fourth day, they discovered they rooted for opposite football teams and spent 40 minutes arguing about it loudly enough that a nurse put her head into check. And on the sixth day, he stopped joking. "Ma'am, there's an investigation." "I know." "About the flight line, about me. They're talking about a formal reprimand, maybe worse depending how the board reads it." He turned the cup in his hands. "It could stall me for years. It could end me if they decide to make an example. And ma'am, I want you to hear this from me before anybody else says it from me. Whatever they decide, I'll take it. All of it. I put my hands on you twice and I hurt you, and I did it because my pride wouldn't let me make one radio call. So please don't feel like you owe me anything. It's not your job to fix what I broke." Riley set the coffee down. She pushed herself upright in the bed despite what it cost because she wanted to be looking at him properly for this. "Cole, what was the first thing I said to you on that flight line before any of the rest of it? You said I was doing my job. I said that on the worst afternoon of my life with 3 broken ribs 90 seconds after you shoved me while 5 men were bleeding on a rock." Her voice was very level. "Do you think I said it to be nice to you?" "No, ma'am. I said it because it's true. I've been doing this 5 years. I know what a good defender looks like, and I was looking at one. That morning you were a good defender who made a bad call, and those are not the same thing, and I need you to stop treating them like they are." She leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. If it had been a real intruder that morning, real intent, real threat, and you'd had that exact same feeling in your gut, and you'd let them stand at that aircraft because the paperwork was awkward, because you didn't want to make a scene, because you second-guessed yourself, and something happened, people died, what would we be saying about you?" Bannister was quiet. "Say it. That I failed," he said. "That I had the instinct and I didn't trust it." "That you failed," she agreed. "The instinct that got you in trouble with me is the identical instinct that makes you a hero on a different Tuesday. You challenged. You held your ground against someone who wouldn't comply. Those are not the broken parts of you, Cole. Those are the load-bearing ones." Her voice hardened. "What went wrong is that you stopped listening. I handed you the fix 3 times and your pride wouldn't pick it up. That's the failure, not the challenge, the pride." "Yes, ma'am. And here's what I know about you now that I didn't know then." She sat back. "You learned it in one afternoon, harder and faster and deeper than most people learn anything in 20 years. I watched you do it in real time, and a man who can learn like that under that kind of pressure is exactly who I want standing on my flight line at 2 in the morning." He was crying and had stopped trying to hide it. "So no, petty officer, I am not going to stay quiet. I'm going to that board, and I'm going to tell them every single thing that happened, including the part where you grabbed my broken side and it hurt like hell. I'm not softening one word of it." She held his eyes. "And then I'm going to tell them who you turned out to be over 11 days. And I'm going to fight for you because you're worth fighting for, and because I would be a poor excuse for an officer if I let this Navy throw away somebody worth keeping." Preston Vale came on the 9th day. He came in the evening when the ward was quiet, and he stood in the doorway in civilian clothes because he'd been placed on administrative leave 4 days earlier, and he did not come in until she told him to. The 7-second video had been on the internet for a week by then. 11 million views on one platform alone. A 26-year-old lieutenant had uploaded it, taken it down inside an hour in a panic. And by then it had been copied 900 times. The world had watched a senior officer tell a bruised woman where the gym was, and then the world had found out who she was, and the world had done what the world does. They're transferring me, Vale said. Instructor billet, Pensacola. No command track, not now, probably not ever. I heard. The board asked me if I wanted to make a statement about the video. What did you say? I said no. He was still standing. Because there's nothing to say. It's 7 seconds and I said the words, and there isn't a version where I didn't. Riley waited. I came here to ask you one thing. Vale's jaw moved. Why didn't you submit it? You had it. Doyle's people had copies. Delgado had copies. Half the station had it before you were out of surgery and you never entered it. The board asked you directly about my conduct on the flight line, and you said, and I read the transcript, the commander's remark is on the record elsewhere, and I don't have anything to add to it. His voice was not smooth anymore. You had a knife and you put it down. Why? Riley looked at him for a long moment. Because I didn't want to beat you, she said. I wanted you to know you were wrong. Those are two completely different things, Commander, and it's going to take you the rest of your life to understand why. Vale stood there. If I'd submitted that video, she went on, you'd have spent every day since telling yourself you got destroyed by a woman with a grudge and a phone. And you'd have been comfortable. Being a victim is comfortable. Sir, it's the most comfortable thing in the world, and I wasn't going to hand it to you. She let that sit. I didn't take it away from you to be kind. I took it away so you'd have to sit alone in a room with the actual thing you did and no story to put over the top of it. That's crueler, Vale said. Yes, Riley said, it is. He was quiet for a long time. You should know, he said finally, that I'd have gone out there to Saltgrave. If Hale had let me, I'd have gotten in that aircraft and I'd have flown to that rock and I'd have killed all 6 of us. And up until the second I hit the face, I'd have believed I was doing something magnificent. He said it flatly like a man reading a diagnosis. I've had 4 days to look at that. That's what's actually wrong with me. It was never about you. I know, Riley said. I knew that on the flight line. Vale nodded once. He turned to go and stopped in the doorway and did not look back. Lieutenant Vaughn. Sir, I'm sorry. And Riley Vaughn said the only thing there was, okay. Not it's fine, not don't worry about it. Just okay, I heard you, it happened. Go carry it. He carried it for 11 years. The board convened 3 weeks later, and Lieutenant Riley Vaughn walked into that hearing room on her own 2 feet, not on a backboard, not in borrowed trousers, in a sports bra with her hair coming apart. This time she was in a flight suit with her name over her heart and her wings in every ribbon. 5 hard years had put on her, and she stood in front of that board, straight-backed with a German shepherd sitting at her left knee, because the board had ruled that a certified working dog could accompany his handler, and nobody had felt like arguing. She told them everything. She told them she'd had no identification. She told them she'd been in the wrong clothes, bruised, concussed, discharged against medical advice. She told them plainly that from Petty Officer Bannister's position with the information available to him, she had looked precisely like a security threat, and he had done exactly what a defender is trained to do. And then because she'd promised to tell all of it, she told them about the shove, both of them. Her arm, the pain, the sound she made. She didn't soften one word. And then she straightened. Members of the board, I've been in this Navy 5 years, and I don't say things like this lightly. She paused. The most impressive thing I have ever watched a young sailor do did not happen on that flight line. It happened in the 11 days after. Nobody in that room moved. He never once tried to blame me for a badge I couldn't have had. He never once asked me to speak, or him not one time, and I want that in the record because I know exactly how rare it is. He came to my room every single day and not to lobby me. He came because he wanted to understand what he had done wrong so that he could become a man who would never do it again. Her voice didn't rise. And on the day it counted, he stood underneath a ladder with his arms out to catch a woman he'd hurt an hour earlier. And then, with 9 minutes of fuel between me and the water, he got on a microphone in a command post full of officers and gave me the only thing left that was worth anything, which was somebody's voice. She looked at each of them in turn. That is not a man you discipline out of the service. That is a man you invest in, because the entire purpose of a security forces defender is judgment under pressure. And I am telling you from more experience with pressure than anyone at this table, Cole Bannister's judgment was tested in the worst possible way it could be tested, and it came out of the fire refined instead of broken. She stopped. I would trust that man with my aircraft. I would trust him with my life. As a matter of record, I already have. At the back of that room, Cole Bannister sat with his cover in his hands and tears running silently down his face, and understood he was watching a kind of grace he had done absolutely nothing to earn and would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. The board deliberated for 51 minutes. They set the formal reprimand aside. In its place, they entered a notation acknowledging both the initial error and the extraordinary character shown in its aftermath. And on the strength of Vaughan's testimony and Captain Hale's personal endorsement, they recommended Petty Officer Bannister for accelerated leadership training. And when the room was clearing out, Bannister walked up to her and could not find one single word and finally got out, "Ma'am, why? Why would you do that for me after what I did?" And that was when he learned about Adela Reyes. Riley sat down on the edge of a table because she couldn't stand for as long as she used to yet, and Titan settled at her feet with his bad leg out straight, and she was quiet for a while. "When I was 21," and she said, "I was the most talented and least tolerable person in my class, and I knew it. That's the part that made it unbearable, I knew, and I made sure everyone else knew, and I was pretty much always right, which is the worst thing that can happen to somebody at 21. What happened? I broke off a training profile, mid-evolution. I disobeyed a direct instruction from my flight lead because I thought I had a better read on the weather." She smiled with no humor in it. "And here's the thing, Cole. I did. I was right. My way worked and his way would have put us in the trees, and it took me 4 years to understand why none of that mattered. Because you disobeyed. Because an order you break when you're sure you know better is the exact same order you break on the day you don't, and that's the day your whole flight dies." She shrugged. "So it didn't matter that I was right. What mattered was the pattern. They were going to wash me out. My career was over at 21 and I deserved it. Who stopped it? My squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Adela Reyes, call sign Sentinel." Riley's voice changed. "Toughest officer I ever served under. I had embarrassed her personally in front of 2 squadrons, and she stood up in a room in front of the people who were about to end me, and she said, I can still hear it, this aviator made a serious error in judgment, and she also has more raw ability than anybody I have flown with in 15 years. And the question in front of us is not whether to punish her. It is whether we are smart enough to shape her instead of breaking her." Bannister sat down slowly. She put her own reputation in front of a train for a 21-year-old who'd humiliated her. And they listened, and then she spent 2 years riding me harder than anyone has ever ridden me, teaching me the difference between confidence and arrogance, between knowing better and thinking you know better. Her eyes were bright. "Everything I am is that. The pilot who went to Saltgrave, the officer who stood up in that room today, all of it exists because one person refused to write me off on my worst day. Where is she now?" And Riley's face did something Bannister had never seen it do. "She was killed," she said quietly, 6 years ago, in weather, going in for people who were pinned down exactly like Saltgrave, except her aircraft didn't come back." The room was very quiet. "Sentinel means the one who stands watch," Riley said. "That's what she was. And she used to say something to us over and over until we were sick of it. She'd say, the best rescue is the one nobody sees coming. So when they gave me a call sign, I picked Ghost. Same family. Something that comes out of the dark and gets there before you know it's there." She looked at him. "I picked it so that every single time somebody on this station says the word ghost, some part of Adela Reyes is still flying." Bannister put his hand over his mouth. "That's what she gave me," Riley said, "and that's what I'm handing you. It doesn't stop with us, Cole. It was never supposed to stop with us." And Cole Bannister understood then the full size of what had happened to him on a 106-degree flight line, that he had stumbled into a chain that stretched back further than he could see and forward into a future he would not be around for, and that he was now a link in it, and that links do not get to opt out. Rourke rebuilt 266 in 14 weeks with his own hands, every piece of it. The Navy's own analysis said she wasn't worth the hours. Rourke read the analysis, folded it in half, put it in his back pocket, and never mentioned it again to anybody. He did the work at night and on weekends and on days he was supposed to be off, and 11 of his sailors kept showing up to help without being asked and without being paid. And when it was done, he had Riley Vaughn fly her first because there was no other way it could have gone. She was cleared to fly again 5 months after the causeway. She flew for 4 more years after that. Titan retired the same month the hospital released him. He was 5 years old with steel in his leg and a limp that got worse in cold weather, and he came home with Riley to a base house with a fenced yard, and he lay at the bottom of her stairs every night for the rest of his life. He learned the sound of her aircraft. That was the thing everybody on that station eventually came to know. A dozen airframes flew in and out of Iron Harbor every day, and the old dog didn't lift his head for any of them. But when 216 came over the fence line, Titan would get up on his bad leg and go stand at the gate, and he was never once wrong about it. Not once. In 4 years. 3 years and 2 months after the flight line, Cole Bannister, petty officer first class, now a watch supervisor with 11 people under him, sat in a room and listened to his own chief make a case for ending a 19-year-old's career. The kid's name was Ellis. He'd been on post 8 weeks. He had cleared a vehicle through a gate without running the plate on a night when the system was down, and he'd been on shift for 11 hours, and the vehicle turned out to be nothing at all, and the paperwork on it was going to bury him anyway. "He's not cut out for this," the chief said. "Better we find out now." "Chief," everyone looked at him. Bannister sat forward. "He's 19. He was 11 hours into a shift with a dead system and no supervisor within a quarter mile, and he made a bad call, and it cost us nothing." He kept his voice completely level. "Now here's what I want to know before we end him. Did he lie about it? Not one word. He wrote it up himself before anybody asked. Did he blame the system? No. Did he ask any of us to cover it? No. And I checked, and he didn't." Bannister. "That's a kid who owned it in the first 8 weeks of his career." "Chief, and I've served with second classes who couldn't do that." Bannister looked around the table. "This is not who he is. This is who he is on his 8th week, and we would be fools to break him when we could shape him instead." The room was quiet for a second. "You want him," the chief said. "I want him on my watch, and I'll take whatever happens next on my record." He got him. Ellis made second class in 3 years, chief in 11, and he stood a watch at Iron Harbor for 19 years and never once knew that a woman he had never met had said almost exactly those words in a hearing room about a man who had shoved her twice on a flight line. He didn't need to know. That's not how it works. It moves whether you know about it or not. Riley Vaughn's last flight came 4 years after the Causeway, and it was a routine training profile with 2 students in the back and clear weather all the way to the horizon, and she brought it home clean and easy and shut it down for the last time as an active pilot. She was taking a staff billet. Her body had made the decision as much as the Navy had the ribs had healed, the ear hadn't, and there is a point at which the machine that carries you starts filing its own reports. The whole station that came out the same way they had the night the ambulance came through the gate. Rourke was at the bottom of the ladder, 55, now hands worse than ever, and he steadied her the way he always had. "Well," he said gruffly, "that's that. That's that. You did good, Riley." His voice went. "Adela would be proud of you." And Riley Vaughn's throat closed completely, because in 9 years, Elias Rourke had never once said that name, had never let on that he knew what the call sign meant. And here at the very end, he had handed her the only thing she had ever actually wanted to hear. She couldn't answer him. She just held on to him for a long moment while 400 people watched and nobody said a word. And then she turned around. And drawn up in ranks on that flight line in 3 straight lines was every security forces defender Cole Bannister could get out of their racks, off their posts, or off their days off, and standing at the front of them was Bannister himself. He'd organized it. He'd been organizing it for 2 weeks. Detachment Attention. 41 people came to attention at once. Present arms. 41 hands came up and held. And at the center of them, Cole Bannister held his own, and his eyes were shining exactly the way they had shone on the hospital steps 4 years earlier. Riley walked over to them slowly, because she still walked slowly with a 9-year-old German shepherd limping along on her left, and she stopped in front of him and returned it. "Ladder guy." "Ma'am, look at you now." "I learned from the best, ma'am." "No." She shook her head. "I showed you the door, Cole. You walked through it. That part was always yours, and don't you ever give it away." His composure cracked. "Ma'am, before you go, there's something I've needed to say for 4 years and never found the right minute for." "Say it." "That morning." He had to stop and start again. "The worst morning of my life. When I looked at you and I saw a problem. When I decided you didn't belong." His jaw was working hard. I used to think about it with nothing but shame. For about a year, that's all it was. Shame every day, first thing when I woke up. And now it's the foundation, he said. That morning is the reason for every kid I've fought for, every airman I refuse to write off. Every good thing I've done in this uniform comes straight out of the worst thing I ever did because of what you chose to do about it. His voice broke completely. You could have hated me, ma'am. You had every right in the world, and nobody would have blamed you, and instead, you took the worst day of my life and turned it into the floor I've been standing on ever since. So I don't feel shame anymore. I feel grateful every single day, and I needed you to know it before you left this flight line. And Riley Valmont, the legend, the ghost, the woman who had gone up a cliff, faced twice in weather, and put a dying aircraft on a causeway with 4 seconds of fuel, stood there and let the tears come. She pulled him into an embrace, a real one this time, both arms. You want the truth, Cole, she said against his shoulder. That morning standing at that aircraft, I was so tired. I was so tired I wasn't sure I had it in me. 40 hours out of the water, ribs broken, and there was a voice in my head telling me to go lie back down and let somebody else go. He pulled back and looked at her. And then you came across that concrete and told me I didn't belong, she said. And something in me stood straight up and said, no, I'm not. I'm not finished, and I'm not a problem, and I'm going to go prove it. Ma'am. So you didn't just witness it, petty officer. In a strange, stupid, beautiful way, you're part of the reason it happened at all. She held his eyes. We saved each other on the worst morning of both our lives, and neither one of us had the first idea we were doing it. Riley Vaughn made commander, then captain. She spent the back half of her career shaping aviators, and she was as fierce behind a desk as she had ever been in a cockpit, and she developed a reputation across 3 commands for exactly one thing she could not be talked out of. A young pilot everybody else had already given up on. She lost some of them anyway. Not everyone can be saved, and she never pretended otherwise. But dozens made it, and every one of them carried a piece of Adela Reyes forward without ever once hearing the name. Cole Bannister made chief in 9 years and command master chief in 18. He was never famous. He never had a story anybody told in a bar. What he had was 2 decades of young sailors who should have been thrown away and weren't, and every one of them remembered the man who slowed the whole machine down and asked one more question. Titan died at 12 in the sun in the yard with his head on Riley Vaughn's foot. She buried him herself. Rourke drove 4 hours to help her do it, and neither of them said much. The harness with Titan on one panel and Ghost on the other went into a case in the Heritage Room at Iron Harbor, and it is still there. And years later, long after all of it, after Riley Vaughn had retired, after Rourke was gone, after the Causeway landing had become a thing, they taught at Pensacola with her name on the slide. A class of brand new sailors was walked into that Heritage Room in their first week the way every class was. They were 19 and 20 and 21. They were certain. They could read a person at a glance, and they knew it. And the retired officer who came in twice a year to tell them the story was a silver-haired instructor named Preston Vale. He had asked for the duty. He had asked for it 11 years running, and Riley Vaughn had known and had never once said anything about it to anybody. He'd point at the photograph on the wall, 25-year-old woman on a 106-degree flight line in an olive drab sports bra and camouflage trousers, hair coming out of a ponytail. Bruised down one side of her face, no badge, no rank. One hand resting on the shoulder of a tan and black German shepherd, and he would tell them about 11 minutes. He would tell them about a young man who saw a problem. Hadi would tell them about 5 men on a rock and a dog on a cable in the dark and 4 seconds of fuel on a bridge. And then he would tell them the part he had earned the right to tell, which was that there had been a commander out there that morning who looked at that same woman and made a joke about a gym, and that the commander had been him. And every time without fail, the room would go absolutely silent. Then Preston Vale would say the thing that had become a creed at Iron Harbor. The thing Riley Vaughn lived and Cole Bannister carried, and 100 others after them passed down until nobody could remember who'd said it first. You will never know just by looking who is standing in front of you. The uniform can be lost. The badge can be cut off your chest on an operating table. Every outward sign of who a person is can be stripped away until they look like nothing, like no one, like somebody who doesn't belong. And underneath all of it, unbroken, unchanged, waiting only for the right word to reveal, It can be the bravest soul on the entire base. Courage does not announce itself. Heroes do not arrive in perfect uniforms. Sometimes they arrive bruised and exhausted and barely standing, dismissed by everyone who sees them holding onto an aircraft because their legs won't do it alone. And the measure of a person is not whether they can recognize a hero wearing medals. The measure of a person is whether they can look at somebody on the worst day of that person's life and choose to believe in who they might still become. That is the whole point. That was always the whole point. Riley Vaughn learned it from Adela Reyes. Cole Bannister learned it from Riley Vaughn. And in a heritage room on a coastal air station year after year, a man who had once gotten it catastrophically wrong taught it to everyone who came after. The chain never broke. It never will. Thought for sevens they kept her 11 days and she fought them for 9 of it. The landing had taken more than she admitted on that causeway. 2 of the fractured ribs had displaced. There was internal bleeding the doctors watched with faces they worked hard to keep flat. The hearing in her left ear came back over 9 days and never came all the way back. And 40 years later, she would still turn her head slightly when someone spoke to her from that side. Aaron Pike came to her room every single morning at 06:30 and read her the list of ways she could have died in order out loud like a man doing penance. On the 4th morning, he stopped in the doorway and said the thing he'd been carrying since the command post. "I would have grounded you." "I know. If Hale hadn't taken it off my hands, I'd have grounded you. And 5 men would be dead on that rock right now, and I would have been right." He said it with his jaw tight. "That's the part I can't get around, Lieutenant. I'd have been right, and they'd be dead. What am I supposed to do with that?" Riley pushed herself up in the bed. It cost her, and she did it anyway because she wanted to be looking at him properly. "Doc, you gave the captain the medicine, and then you gave him the truth, and then you told him it wasn't yours to pick. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people give you one and pretend it's both." She held his eyes. "You didn't fail. You did the job exactly right, and the but happened to be an impossible one. That's all. Go home tonight and hold your kids and stop coming in here at 6:30 in the morning to punish yourself." Pike stood in that doorway a second longer. Then he said yes, ma'am, to a lieutenant, which he had not done to anyone below, commander in 11 years, and walked out. Titan came out of surgery on the 2nd night, and that was when they found out what he'd done. A fragment had gone into the muscle of his right hind leg somewhere in the last 30 seconds over Saltgrave. Nobody knew, not Torres, who had been 3 feet from him in the cabin, not Doyle, not Riley, because he hadn't made a sound. 48 hours. A dog with steel in his leg had gone down a cliff face on a cable into a fissure in the dark, laid his body across a broken man for 11 minutes, come back up that same cable and then ridden 108 miles in a dying aircraft and had not limped once until the wheels stopped rolling on Route 9. The veterinary surgeon, a lieutenant commander named Osei, explained it to Riley on the 3rd morning with the careful voice people use. "The leg will work. He'll walk normally on flat ground. He'll be stiff in cold weather, and he'll be stiff after he sleeps." A pause. "But there's no version of this where he goes back to full duty. I'm sorry." Riley didn't move for a moment. He'll walk. He'll walk fine." "Then that's the whole thing," she said. "The rest is paperwork." But she turned her face toward the window until Osei left the room, and the corpsman who was changing her IV afterwards saw her hands and did not say anything about it to anybody then or ever. Elijah Amara, compound femur 4 ribs skull fracture, on the floor above her, got himself into a wheelchair on day 6 and made a terrified ensign push him 2 floors down and into the veterinary ward, which broke about 9 separate regulations. He sat in front of that kennel for 20 minutes without saying a word. Then he said to a dog, "I heard you breathing. That's all I had for 2 hours down there. I couldn't see anything and I couldn't move. And I heard you breathing on my neck and I stopped being alone." Titan put his nose through the mesh and left it there. Amara's wife found him like that 40 minutes later, and she did not say one word about it either. Marcus Doyle almost didn't make it out of the following month, and nobody caught it because he was the one nobody worried about. He was the JTAC. He'd walked off that rock. He wasn't wounded. He got debriefed and commended and sent back to his unit, and for 3 weeks he was fine in the way that men are fine right up until they aren't. Then Riley Vaughn got a phone call in a hospital bed from a chief she had never met, who said carefully that Petty Officer Doyle had stopped sleeping and had asked twice about separating from the Navy, and that somebody had mentioned that the pilot might have some influence with him. Doyle came to see her on day 9. He stood at the end of her bed like a man at a funeral. "Ma'am." "Sit down, Marcus." "I'd rather stand." "Sit down." He sat. And for 4 minutes he said absolutely nothing. And Riley Vaughn, who had every excuse in the world to be tired, let him have all 4 of them without filling 1 second of it. Then he said, "I left him." "You didn't." "I left Chief Amara in a hole in the rocks for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and I could hear him, and I went back to the other 4, and I left him." His voice was flat and wrong. "4 times I tried to get down there. 4. And every time I got about 8 feet and I couldn't find footing, and I came back up. And I've been doing that in my head every night since. Every night, ma'am. Only in my head I keep going. In my head, I get down there." "And in your head, what happens to the man with the sucking chest wound you were holding pressure on?" Doyle stopped. "Say it," Riley said. "You know the answer. Say it out loud because you've never said it out loud, and that's why it's eating you." "He dies. He dies. And the man with the crush injury, who you rolled onto his side twice so he didn't aspirate, what happens to him?" "Ma'am, what happens to him, Marcus?" "He probably dies." "He definitely dies. And then Amara dies anyway because you'd have been down in that fissure with no rope and no light and a broken man you can't carry, and my dog would have come down and found 2 bodies instead of 1. Her voice never rose once. "You didn't leave him. You held the line at the only place it could be held, alone for 2 hours at 23 years old, with no one to tell you if you were right. And then you handed me 4 people alive." Doyle put his face in his hands. "I keep thinking a better man would have gotten down there." "There is no better man," Riley said. "There's just the one who was there. And he was you, and he did it right, and I am not going to let you quit this Navy over a story you're telling yourself at 3 in the morning." He cried for a while. She let him. And then before he left, she said one more thing, and he wrote it down that night on the back of a duty roster and carried it in his wallet until the paper came apart. "Marcus, the men you saved are not going to spend the rest of their lives wondering whether you did enough. Only you are. So you're going to have to decide at some point whether you're going to keep torturing the one person on that rock who nobody else has a single complaint about." Doyle stayed in. He made chief in 11 years. And Cole Bannister came every single day, and the first day he almost didn't come in at all. He stood in that doorway for a full minute and turned to leave 3 separate times because who was he and what right did he have, and what in God's name does a man say? Riley watched him hover. "Are you going to stand in that door all afternoon, petty officer? Or are you going to come in here and talk to me? I've read every magazine in this room twice, and I am losing my mind." So he came in, and it was excruciating, both of them, walking carefully around the enormous thing in the middle of the room. She didn't let it stay that way. She asked where he was from Ohio. She asked why he joined, and he gave her the recruiting poster answer, and she just looked at him until he gave her the real one. "I didn't want to be a guy nothing ever happens to," he said. "That's it. That's the whole thing. My dad's a machinist. His dad was a machinist. They're good men. Nothing ever happened to either of them, and I couldn't stand the idea of it." Riley nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "something happened to you." He laughed, and it came out half a sob, and she let him have that too. Second day, he brought her coffee and got it exactly right. And when she raised an eyebrow, he admitted he'd asked Rourke, and she told him that was precisely the kind of initiative the Navy claimed to value and almost never rewarded. Fourth day, they discovered they rooted for opposite football teams and argued about it loudly enough that a nurse put her head in to make sure nothing was wrong. And on the 6th day, he stopped joking. "Ma'am, there's an investigation." "I know. They're talking about a formal reprimand, maybe worse depending how the board reads it." He turned to the cup in his hands and didn't look up. "It could stall me for years. It could end me if somebody decides to make an example. And I want you to hear this from me before anybody says it for me." He made himself look up. "Whatever they decide, I'll take it. All of it. I put my hands on you twice, and I hurt you, and I did it because my pride wouldn't let me make one radio call. So please don't feel like you owe me anything. It's not your job to fix what I broke. I broke it." Riley set the coffee down. "Cole, what's the first thing I said to you on that flight line before any of the rest of it? That I was doing my job. I said it 90 seconds after you shoved me with 3 broken ribs while 5 men bled on a rock." Her voice was very level. "Do you think I said it to be nice to you?" "Oh, no, ma'am. I said it because it's true, and here's what I want to ask you, and I want a real answer. She leaned forward. Suppose it had been a real intruder that morning, real intent, and you had that exact same feeling in your gut, and you let them stand at that aircraft because the paperwork was awkward, because you didn't want a scene, because you second-guessed yourself, and people died. What would this Navy be saying about you? He was quiet a long moment. That I failed, that I had the instinct and didn't trust it. That you failed, she agreed. The instinct that got you in trouble with me is the identical instinct that makes you a hero on a different Tuesday. You challenged, you held ground against someone who wouldn't comply. Those are not the broken parts of you, Cole. Those are the load-bearing ones. Then her voice hardened. What went wrong is that you stopped listening. I handed you the fix 3 separate times, and your pride wouldn't pick it up. That's the failure, not the challenge, the pride. Yes, ma'am. And here's what I know about you now that I didn't know then. She sat back. You learned it in one afternoon, harder and deeper and faster than most people learn anything in 20 years. I watched you do it in real time. And a man who can learn like that under that kind of pressure is exactly who I want standing on my flight line at 2 in the morning. He was crying and had stopped bothering to hide it. So no, petty officer, I'm not staying quiet. I'm going to that board, and I'm telling them every single thing that happened, including the part where you grabbed my broken side and it hurt like hell. I'm not softening one word of it. She held his eyes. And then I'm going to tell them who you turned out to be over 11 days. And I'm going to fight for you because you're worth fighting for, and because I would be a poor excuse for an officer if I let this Navy throw away somebody worth keeping. Okay. The video went up on the 5th day, 7 seconds. A lieutenant commander telling a bruised woman where the gym was 3 men laughing behind him. The lieutenant who'd filmed it uploaded it in a moment of guilt. At 2 in the morning, panicked and deleted it inside 40 minutes. And by then, it had been copied 900 times. 11 million views on one platform in 6 days. Then somebody in the comments said, that's the Salt Grave pilot, and the internet did what the internet does. It found the causeway footage. It found the state police dash cam of an aircraft coming down out of a lowering sky onto 4,000 feet of empty bridge. It found a photograph taken by a fueler on his phone of 200 people standing at attention on a 106-degree flight line for a woman in a sports bra with a German shepherd against her leg. And Riley Valmont, lying in a hospital bed with a tube in her arm, became for about 9 days the most watched human being in the country. She hated every second of it. That surprised people. It shouldn't have. They keep calling, a public affairs lieutenant told her on day 7 breathless. Ma'am, there are 4 national programs asking for you. This is enormously positive coverage for the service. And I've been asked to... No. Ma'am, I don't think you understand the scale of... I understand the scale, fine. Here's what happens if I go on television. Riley didn't raise her. It becomes a story about a woman and a joke, 7 seconds of a bad man being bad. And the actual story, the one that's worth telling, is that a 23-year-old JTAC held a rock alone for 2 hours, and a crew chief ran a hoist in a shear that should have killed a man, and a state trooper talked a stranger out of a truck, and a flight surgeon told the truth when a lie would have been easier. She let that land. There were about 200 people in that story, Lieutenant, and I'm the only one anybody would put on television. So no, tell them no. Public Affairs went away furious. And Marcus Hale, when he heard about it, sat in his office for a full minute and then wrote a 1-page letter to the Chief of Naval Operations that ended with a sentence that got quoted back to him for the rest of his career. In 30 years, I have never watched an officer be handed the entire country and give it away because she thought other people had earned more of it. Preston Vale came on the 9th day. He came in the evening when the ward was quiet in civilian clothes because he'd been on administrative leave for 4 days, and he stood in the doorway until she told him to come in. They're transferring me. Instructor Billet Pensacola. No command track. Not now, probably not ever. I heard. The board asked if I wanted to make a statement about the video. What did you say? I said no, because there's nothing to say. It's 7 seconds, and I said the words, and there is no version of this where I didn't. He was still standing. I came to ask you one thing. Ask. Why didn't you submit it? His voice was not smooth anymore, and that was the first honest thing about him she'd ever heard. You had it. Doyle's people had copies. Delgado had copies. Half this station had it before you were out of surgery. And when the board asked you directly about my conduct on that flight line, you said I read the transcript. The commander's remark is on the record elsewhere, and I have nothing to add to it. His jaw worked. You had a knife, and you set it down. Why? Riley looked at him for a long moment. Because I didn't want to beat you, she said. I wanted you to know you were wrong. Those are two completely different things, Commander, and it's going to take you the rest of your life to understand why. Vale didn't answer. If I'd entered that video, you'd have spent every day since telling yourself you were destroyed by a woman with a grudge and a camera, and you'd have been comfortable. She let the words sit there. Being a victim is the most comfortable thing in the world. It explains everything and it costs nothing, and I wasn't going to hand you that. So you left me with nothing to hide behind. Yes. That's crueler, Vale said quietly. Yes, Riley said. It is. He stood there for a long time. And then Preston Vale said the thing that neither of them ever repeated to another human being. I'd have gone out there, to Saltgrave, if Hale had let me. He said it flatly like a man reading a lab result about himself. I'd have gotten in that aircraft and flown to that rock and killed all 6 of us, and right up until the second I hit the face, I would have believed I was doing something magnificent. He swallowed. I've had 4 days alone in a room to look at that. It was never about you. It was never about women, or about your record, or about any of the things I've been telling myself for 11 years. I just could not stand that you were there and I wasn't. I know, Riley said. I knew that on the flight line. He nodded once, turned to go, stopped in the doorway without looking back. Lieutenant Vaughn. Sir, I'm sorry. And Riley Vaughn said the only honest thing available. Okay. Not it's fine. Not don't worry about it. Just okay, I heard you. It happened. Now go carry it. He carried it for 11 years. The board convened 3 weeks later, and Lieutenant Riley Vaughn walked into that hearing room on her own 2 feet. Not on a backboard, not in borrowed trousers, with her hair coming apart and no badge on her chest. This time she came in wearing a flight suit with her name over her heart and her wings and every ribbon. 5 hard years had earned her, and she stood in front of that board, straight-backed with a German shepherd sitting at her left knee, because the board had ruled a certified working dog could accompany his handler, and nobody at that table had felt like being the one to argue about it. She told them everything. No identification, wrong clothes. Bruised, concussed, discharged against medical advice. She told them plainly that from Petty Officer Bannister's position, with the information available to him, at that moment she had looked precisely like a security threat, and that he had done exactly what a defender is trained to do. And then because she'd promised to tell all of it, she told them about the shove. Both of them. Her arm, the pain, the sound she made. She didn't soften a word. Then she straightened. Members of the board, I've been in this Navy 5 years, and I don't say things like this lightly. She paused. The most impressive thing I have ever watched a young sailor do did not happen on that flight line. It happened in the 11 days after it. Nobody in that room moved. He never once tried to blame me for a badge I couldn't have had. He never once asked me to speak for him, not one time, and I want that in the record because I know exactly how rare that is. He came to my room every day and not to lobby me. He came because he wanted to understand what he'd done wrong badly enough to become a man who would never do it again. Her voice stayed level. And on the day it counted, he stood underneath a ladder with his arms out, ready to catch a woman he had hurt an hour before. And then with 9 minutes of fuel between me and the water, he stood up in a command post full of officers with no rank and no standing, and asked for the microphone so he could give me the only thing left that was worth anything, which was somebody's voice. She looked at each of them. That is not a man you discipline out of the service. That is a man you invest in. The entire purpose of a defender is judgment under pressure. And I am telling you from more experience with pressure than anyone at this table, Cole Bannister's judgment was tested in the worst way it could possibly be tested, and it came out of that fire refined instead of broken. She stopped. I would trust that man with my aircraft. I would trust him with my life. As a matter of record, I already have. At the back of that room, Cole Bannister sat with his cover in his hands and tears running down his face, and understood he was watching a kind of grace he had done nothing whatsoever to earn and would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. The board deliberated 51 minutes. They set the reprimand aside. In its place, they entered a notation acknowledging both the initial error and the extraordinary characters shown afterward, and on the strength of Volman's testimony, in Captain Hale's personal endorsement, they recommended him for accelerated leadership training. And when the room was clearing out, Bannister walked up to her and could not find a single word and finally got out, "Ma'am, why would you do that for me after what I did?" And that was when he learned about Adela Reyes. Riley sat down on the edge of a table because she couldn't stand as long as she used to yet, and Titan settled at her feet with the bad legs stretched out straight. When I was 21, and she said, "I was the most talented and least tolerable person in my class, and I knew it. That's what made it unbearable, I knew. And I made sure everybody else knew, and I was almost always right, which is the worst thing that can happen to a person at 21. What happened? I broke off a training profile mid-evolution, disobeyed a direct instruction from my flight lead because I thought I had a better read on the weather." She smiled with nothing in it. "And here's the thing, Cole, I did. I was right. My way worked, and his way would have put us in the trees, and it took me 4 years to understand why none of that mattered. Because you disobeyed. Because an order you break when you're sure you know better is the exact same order you break on the day you don't, and that's the day your whole flight dies." She shrugged. "So it didn't matter that I was right. What mattered was the pattern. They were going to wash me out. My career was over at 21, and I'd earned it." "Who stopped it?" "My squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Adela Reyes, call sign Sentinel." Her voice changed. "Toughest officer I ever served under. I had humiliated her personally in front of 2 squadrons. And she stood up in a room in front of the people about to end me, and she said, I can still hear the exact cadence of it. This aviator made a serious error in judgment, and she also has more raw ability than anyone I have flown with in 15 years. And the question in front of us is not whether to punish her. It is whether we are smart enough to shape her instead of breaking her." Bannister sat down slowly. She put her own reputation in front of a train for a 21-year-old who'd embarrassed her. And they listened. And then she spent 2 years riding me harder than any human being has ever ridden me, teaching me the difference between confidence and arrogance, between knowing better and thinking you know better. Where is she now? And Riley's face did something Bannister had never once seen it do. "She was killed," she said quietly, "6 years ago in weather, going in for people who were pinned down almost exactly like Salgrave, except her aircraft didn't come back." The room went very still. "Sentinel means the one who stands watch. That's what she was." Riley's eyes were bright and she didn't blink. "And she used to say a thing to us over and over until we were sick of hearing it. She'd say the best rescue is the one nobody sees coming." Bannister's breath went out of him. "So when they gave me a call sign," Riley said, "I picked Ghost. Same family, something that comes out of the dark and gets there before you know it's there." She looked at him. "I picked it so that every single time somebody on this station says the word ghost, some part of Adela Reyes is still flying." He put his hand over his mouth. "That's what she gave me," Riley said. "And that is exactly what I just handed you in that room. It doesn't stop with us, Cole. It was never supposed to stop with us." And Cole Bannister understood then the true size of what had happened to him on a 106-degree flight line, that he had stumbled into a chain stretching back further than he could see and forward into a future he would not live to watch, and that he was now a link in it, and links do not get to opt out. Rourke rebuilt 266 in 14 weeks with his own hands, every piece of it. The Navy's own cost analysis said she wasn't worth the man-hours. Rourke read that analysis standing up, folded it in half, put it in his back pocket, and never mentioned it to another human being for the rest of his life. He did the work at night and on weekends and on days he was supposed to be off, and 11 of his sailors kept showing up to help, without being asked and without being paid. And when it was finished, he had Riley Vaughn fly her first because there was no other way it could have gone. She was cleared 5 months after the causeway. She flew 4 more years. Titan retired the month they released him from the veterinary ward, 5 years old, steel in his leg, a limp that got worse in cold weather. He came home to a base house with a fenced yard and lay at the bottom of the stairs every night for the rest of his life. And he learned the sound of her aircraft. That was the thing everyone on that station eventually came to know about the old dog. A dozen airframes came and went over that fence line every single day, and he never lifted his head for one of them. But when 216 came in, Titan would get up on his bad leg walk to the gate and stand there. Never once wrong. In 4 years, not one time. 3 years and 2 months after the flight line, Petty Officer First Class Cole Bannister sat in a room and listened to his own chief make a case for ending a 19-year-old's career. The kid's name was Ellis, 8 weeks on post. He'd cleared a vehicle through a gate without running the plate on a night the system was down, and he was 11 hours into a shift, and the vehicle had turned out to be a contractor's van with nothing in it at all, and the paperwork was going to bury him anyway. He's not cut out for this, the chief said. Better we find out now than in 5 years. Chief, every head at that table came around. He's 19, 11 hours into a shift-dead system, no supervisor within 400 yards. He made a bad call, and it cost us nothing. Bannister's voice stayed completely level. Now here's what I want on the table before we end him. Did he lie about it? Not one word. He wrote it up himself before anybody asked him. Did he blame the system? No. Did he ask anybody here to cover for him? He looked around. No, and I checked, because I wanted to know. Bannister. That's a kid who owned it in his 8th week, chief. I've served with second classes who couldn't do that in 10 years. He leaned forward. This is not who he is. This is who he is on his 8th week, and we would be fools to break him when we could shape him instead. The room was quiet for a second. You want him, the chief said. I want him on my watch, and whatever happens next goes on my record, not yours. He got him. Ellis made second class in 3 years, in chief in 11, and stood watch at Iron Harbor for 19 years. And he never once knew that a woman he never met had said almost exactly those words in a hearing room about a man who had shoved her twice on a flight line. He didn't need to know. That's not how it works. It moves whether you know about it or not. Riley Vaughn's last flight came 4 years after the Causeway, and it was nothing a routine training profile, 2 students in the back, cleared all the way to the horizon. She brought it home clean and shut it down for the last time as an active pilot. She was taking a staff billet. Her body had made the decision as much as the Navy had. The ribs healed, the ear never did. The whole station came out the same as the night the ambulance came through the gate. Rourke was at the bottom of the ladder, 55 now, hands worse than ever, and he steadied her the way he always had. Well, he said gruffly, that's that. That's that. You did good, Riley. His voice went out from under him. Adela would be proud of you. And her throat closed completely because in 9 years, Elias Rourke had never once said that name, had never let on that he knew what the call sign meant. And here at the very end, without being asked, he had handed her the only thing she had ever actually wanted to hear. She couldn't answer him. She just held on to him while 400 people watched and nobody said a word. And then she turned around. Drawn up in 3 straight ranks on that flight line was every security forces defender Cole Bannister could pull off a post out of Iraq or off a day off, 41 of them. He'd been organizing it for 2 weeks. Detachment attention. 41 people came to attention at once. Present arms, 41 hands came up and held. Riley walked over slowly because she still walked slowly with a 9-year-old German shepherd limping along on her left. She stopped in front of him and returned it. Ladder guy. Ma'am, look at you now. I learned from the best, ma'am. No, she shook her head. I showed you the door, Cole. You walked through it. That part was always yours, and don't you ever give it away to anybody. Not even me. His composure cracked straight down the middle. Ma'am, before you go, there's something I've needed to say for 4 years and never found the right minute. Say it. That morning, he had to stop and start over. The worst morning of my life. When I looked at you and saw a problem. When I decided you didn't belong. His jaw was working hard. For about a year, all I felt about it was shame. Every day. First thing when I woke up. And now it's the floor, he said. That morning is the reason for every kid I've fought for, every sailor I refuse to write off. Every decent thing I've done in this uniform comes directly out of the worst thing I ever did because of what you chose to do about it. His voice broke apart completely. You could have hated me, ma'am. You had every right and nobody on earth would have blamed you. And instead you took the worst day of my life and turned it into the foundation of everything I've become. So I don't feel shame anymore. I feel grateful. Every single day, and I needed you to know that before you left this flight line. And Riley Vaughn bossed the legend, the ghost. The woman who had gone up that cliff face twice in weather and put a dying aircraft on a causeway, with 4 seconds of fuel, stood there and let the tears come. She pulled him into an embrace, a real one this time, both arms. "You want the truth, Cole," she said against his shoulder. "That morning standing at that aircraft, I was so tired. 40 hours out of the water, ribs broken, and there was a voice in my head telling me to go lie back down and let somebody else go. And I was listening to it." He pulled back and looked at her. "And then you came across that concrete and told me I didn't belong. And something in me stood straight up and said, no, I'm not finished. I'm not a problem. And I'm going to go prove it." She held his eyes. "So you didn't just witness it, petty officer. In some strange, stupid, beautiful way, you're part of the reason it happened at all. We saved each other on the worst morning of both our lives, and neither one of us had the first idea we were doing it." No. Riley Vaughn made commander, then captain. She spent the back half of her career shaping aviators and was every bit as fierce behind a desk as she had been in a cockpit, and she developed a reputation across 3 commands for exactly one thing: she could not be talked out of, a young pilot everyone else had already given up on. She lost some of them. Anyway, not everyone can be saved, and she never pretended otherwise. But dozens made it, and every one of them carried a piece of Adela Reyes forward without ever hearing the name. Cole Bannister made chief in 9 years and command master chief in 18. He was never famous. Nobody told stories about him in bars. What he had instead was 2 decades of young sailors who should have been thrown away and weren't. Marcus Hale retired and came back once a year to the Heritage Room and never made it through the story dry-eyed, not once, and stopped being embarrassed about that somewhere around year 4. Titan died at 12 in the sun in the yard with his head on Riley Vaughn's foot. She buried him herself. Rourke drove 4 hours to help, and neither of them said much. The harness Titan stitched on one panel, Ghost on the other, went into a case at Iron Harbor, and it is still there. And years after all of it, a class of brand new sailors was walked into that Heritage Room in their first week the way every class was. They were 19 and 20 and 21. They were certain about everything. They could read a person at a glance, and they knew it. And the retired officer who came in twice a year to tell them the story was a silver-haired instructor named Preston Vale. He had asked for the duty. He had asked for it 11 years running. And Riley Vaughn had known from the first year and had never once said a word about it to anybody. He'd point at the photograph on the wall, a 25-year-old woman on a 106-degree flight line in an olive-drab sports bra and camouflage trousers, hair coming out of a ponytail, bruised down one side of her face, no badge, no rank, one hand resting on the shoulder of a tan and black German shepherd. And he would tell them about 11 minutes, about a young man who saw a problem, about 5 men on a rock-a-dog on a cable in the dark, and 4 seconds of fuel on a bridge. And then he would tell them the part he had earned the right to tell, that there had been a commander out on that flight line that morning who looked at that same woman and made a joke about a gym while 3 men laughed, and that the commander was him. Every time, without fail, the room would go absolutely silent. Then Preston Vale would say the thing that had become a creed at Iron Harbor, the thing Riley Vaughn lived and Cole Bannister carried, and 100 others after them handed down until nobody could remember who said it first. You will never know just by looking who is standing in front of you. The uniform can be lost. The badge can be cut off your chest on an operating table. Every outward sign of who a person is can be stripped away until they look like nothing. Like no one, like somebody who doesn't belong anywhere near the place they are standing. And underneath all of it, unbroken, unchanged, waiting only for the right word to reveal it, can be the bravest soul on the entire base. Courage does not announce itself. Heroes do not arrive in perfect uniforms. Sometimes they arrive bruised and exhausted and barely upright, dismissed by every person who sees them holding onto an aircraft because their legs won't do it alone. And the measure of a person is not whether they can recognize a hero wearing medals. The measure of a person is whether they can look at somebody on the worst day of that person's life and choose to believe in who they might still become. Riley Vaughn learned it from Adela Reyes. Cole Bannister learned it from Riley Vaughn. And in a Heritage Room on a coastal air station year after year, the man who had once gotten it catastrophically wrong taught it to every sailor who came after. That is the whole point. That was always the whole point. The chain did not break. It never will.